All right, everybody. Let's see. If you disagree with anything above, if you disagree with any of this, you can request. All right, first person joined. Hey, how's it going? If you disagree with anything up here, feel free to request. What's up, people? I am back. So I'm mostly going to be looking for disagreements today. So if you disagree with anything up there or you want to disagree with me, I'm an atheist. I don't think there's objective moral truth. I don't think there's free will. I don't think there's anything supernatural. If you disagree with any of that stuff, you're welcome to come up and request, and I'd be happy to talk to you. Hey, everybody. Yes, we will wait until there's more people. I think the last one went all right. I'm still not putting these up on YouTube. I gotta set that up so that I could do that. You're boring. Why am I boring? There's no request button. What do you mean there's no request button? Should be working. Yeah, it should be working. All right, I did one. I don't know how to add the actual request button onto the thing. I got to figure out how to do that. Hi, Kenneth. You there?
Hi. Yeah,
Hey, how's it
your
going?
request button works. The request button works just fine. I just wanted to.
Okay. Yeah, someone said there's no request button. Oh well. Anyway, what's up? Did you want to talk about one of the things up here?
Audio issue here. I'm not sure what's going on here.
Oh, whoa,
Yeah,
suddenly you
let
got
me.
you
Sorry.
sounded way different. Oh, are you like switching around microphones?
Sorry about that. I did because I was
Let's
getting
get it
like a
started.
weird feedback thing, and I didn't want to start the echo. Okay, cool. So when we're talking about free will, I wanted to get
Hmm.
your take because I saw a live the other night where the individual was saying atheist. The prompt was atheists cannot love their families. And this was how they formulated their argument. They were talking about how love must be something that is freely given. So he said if atheism necessitates materialism, and under materialism free will cannot be justified because everything's deterministic and depending on your conception of materialism, then basically you cannot freely choose to love anybody. So atheists therefore cannot experience love. And I wanted to get your thoughts on how the lack of free will impacts choice.
Okay, yeah. So to address that last question first, I don't think free will has anything to do with whether people are able to make choices or not. So, if you understand a choice to mean something like selecting from a range of possible possibilities, like, if I'm at a restaurant and there's a menu and there's more than one thing on the menu, I can choose one thing or another thing. And that choice means something like to consider among the range of possibilities and then select one of them, something like that, to just give a really simple, like sort of crude account of choice. Those choices can be determined. Those choices can be ones made where one has no free will, where, if you're rejecting a libertarian conception of free will, and yet one is still making a choice. So I don't see choice as in any way threatened by, it's certainly not threatened by determinism, because one can think that people are determined and then they're just determined to make the choices that they make. Not a problem at all. But that is consistent with there being free will. Even if you reject free will, it's just going to matter what conception of free will you're rejecting. One could say that by choice, they just mean something that requires free will, but then they're just stipulating, hey, what I mean by a choice is something about which one must exercise their free will. And then, of course, that's inconsistent with having free will. Like, you can't make choices then if you don't have free will. But that's trivial. So people just need to be clear on the terms that they're using. And once they are, it will be either trivially true that you can't make choices without free will, or trivially true that you can.
We're in complete agreement. I just love how you articulate this stuff. Do you think that prior causes in this view would amount, though, to a form of duress? And I'm playing devil's advocate here with this.
Right. No, I get that. I mean, it depends what you mean. It depends what you mean by duress. I mean, there's a certain sense in which I think, yeah. So, I used to say I'm an incompatibilist and I don't believe in free will. But as I understood more of the philosophical literature on free will, I started to just think that the very concept itself is kind of confused and useless and needs to be discarded. I now think of free will in the sort of contemporary philosophical discourse as a sort of residual holdover of a theistic conception of the world. And I just reject it as nonsense. Like, so people have tried to basically take theological notions, strip them of their theological elements, and then reconstrue them in non-theological terms. And I think it's just like moral realism. I think there's just a lot of confusion about what's being said there. But I do think that there's a certain sense in which, like I'll say this. I am with incompatibilists like Caruso and others, or people that are like maybe not no free will either way. They don't. So incompatible is this view that free will is incompatible with determinism. Like you can't have free will if determinism is true. I don't think it matters either way. I just don't think people have free will, whether determinism is true or not. And there are people that endorse that sort of view, like philosophers. Now, I'm on their side in rejecting what in the literature is called a desert-based conception of moral responsibility, where I don't think that if a person does something that we would say is wrong or blameworthy, that we should punish them because they deserve to be punished. Like we should punish them for independent of the consequences it would bring to that person or society. It's not to rehabilitate the person. It's not to deter them or other people from committing the action. It's that if they do a bad thing, they deserve the punishment. I don't believe in that kind of deserve. Now, in the literature, free will is virtually defined. Like if you look at Caruso's neurolaw, and other philosophers talk about it in this way, they basically just treat free will as whatever you need to have moral responsibility. And so they have this very specific conception, and I think there's lots of problems with that.
Okay. Well, and I was going to ask you because this is very interesting. So my interest in this topic was piqued when I was actually in law school and thinking about the ethics of sentencing guidelines. And I was going before you went there. And you're absolutely right about the sort of punitive nature of our system. I would urge people to read. There's like a preamble to the federal sentencing guidelines where it explicitly says that the principal aim of our system is to punish wrongdoers, and all of that is predicated on the idea that people could at any given moment choose to do something other than what they will in fact do. So I wonder, do you think that the persistence of this is informed by a sort of like pragmatic justification because people think in these ways that we have to be able to prevent people from doing what they will do?
I think that that's one factor, but I don't think it's the only factor or primary factor. Now, my view of what we should be using the legal system to do, I would construe it in purely consequentialist terms. So I think that we should punish people in a way that optimizes for achieving the societal outcomes that we want to achieve. So if a particular punishment is just totally ineffective at deterring the person from committing the crime, like it doesn't reduce like, okay, imagine if you punish a person, you cause them suffering, you do something to them they don't want you to do, but it doesn't protect society or benefit us in any way at all. It doesn't reduce instances of the crime. It doesn't cause that person to be less likely to commit the crime. And like it doesn't reform or change that person's behavior in any way. Like it doesn't have any positive benefits. I don't see any point in punishing the person at that point. I'm only in favor of punishing people to the extent that doing so achieves some sort of good. Now, that does run up against a potential other problem, which is, well, what if, really wild punishments like just lock everyone in prison for life is the best method for achieving good societal outcomes? Then that's just going to run up against my other concerns and interests and values. And then I might think, okay, well, I don't want to do that. But what I definitely don't think is that people should be punished because it's good to punish them if they do bad things. I just don't think that punishment is good for its own sake.
Well, right. It would just be sort of an unjustified infliction of suffering at that point. If there's no pragmatic if there's no justification for it. I mean, if we're just locking people up and there's no benefit to be derived from it, then I don't see how it could be ethical. But cool. Well, yeah, no, I appreciate it. I wanted to dig in on just get your take on that. Somebody in the chat did ask, was it so-and-so who had that stream? And they were correct, but I don't want to draw attention to that individual. I just wanted to
fair enough.
yeah, the argument itself. So yeah, appreciate it.
Cool. Okay. Well, it sound. I'll move on to the next guest then. But yeah, you're welcome to come back if you have other questions or you want to come back up
Wonderful.
and talk about something.
Appreciate your
Cool.
content. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. No problem. All right. We'll bring up the next person. Dream of Dawn.
It's Nils here. I just wanted to ask you because I heard you have a stance on normativity. Like, because I'm curious, because I'm trying to, like, my stance on normativity is basically that's just like an abstraction of the mind that we like
Mhm.
make to like just like get through life. Like, it's not a real thing. It's just something that comes as an emergent property of other shit. But I heard you have it, and maybe I'm hearing it wrong. I'd rather hear it straight from the horse's mouth. So I'm curious, is that like your take on normativity, or is that something
That
else?
doesn't sound like it would be inconsistent. Like if you said more, maybe we would find somewhere where we disagree. Basically, what I take issue with is what academic philosophers are talking about when they talk about normativity. What I really object to is the idea that there are normative facts, normative reasons, normative considerations, normative values that cannot be reduced to or understood in purely descriptive terms. This is what you call irreducible normativity. That's what I take issue with. So someone might say something like, "You ought not cause harm," or "You ought not do something bad." What I want to know when they say that is, what do you mean by that? Because I can tell you what I mean. If I say you shouldn't do that, I can reconstrue that as something like, I don't want you to do that, and then I'm evoking sort of folk psychological terms like want, like a desire that might be cashed out in a way that's perfectly natural, perfectly comprehensible. That few people would take a big issue with. Somebody might even take an issue with that. That's fine. But proponents in the philosophical literature of irreducible normativity would say, no, you can't reconstrue. You shouldn't do bad in terms of like you shouldn't. That's inconsistent with my desires, or that's wrong according to our culture standards. It can't be reconstrued in any of those ways. It's unanalyzable. It's primitive. It can't be reduced further. It's fundamentally prescriptive and normative. It's just, you ought not do that. That is bad.
Okay, wait, could I
Period.
like explain
Yeah.
this back to you just to make sure I'm
Sure.
understanding it? So I think
Mm-hmm.
we have like a similar view here. It's just like you're saying essentially any sort of normative fact comes from something that is descriptive in a sense. Like we could describe this normative fact in descriptive terms. Like, oh, well, Joey likes I don't know, like milk or whatever. That's like, or I guess like I like milk, or like milk is good would be like my fact, okay? But that normative fact isn't like something that's irreducible, like you can't just like it's not that this is irreducible, that like you can't break this down further into like descriptive facts. You deny that because most people would say, or at least not most, I don't know how many philosophers say this, but it sounds like a decent amount of philosophers would say, hey, you can't break down this normative stance into like descriptive like stances because it's only ever going to stay normative, and at most you can do is reduce it to more normative statements. But then you would say, and I think I agree with this, is like, no, we can look at stuff like the person's psychology, the person's mental architecture,
Mm-hmm.
the environment, what's pressuring them, et cetera, to make a very accurate prediction on what their normative state is. And that means, hey, we can actually reduce your normative state into a set of descriptive or descriptions of reality that have affected you.
That's exactly right. You did a great job. Yeah.
Oh, based.
So one way to put it would just be that I would say all normative claims are either they're like, because people could just say nonsense if they want to, right? Someone could say, I intend to make an irreducibly normative claim, and this is it. That is bad. Okay, in that case, I wouldn't say that's reducible to a descriptive claim. I'd say they're saying nonsense. But meaningful normative claims, I think, are a subset. They're a type of descriptive claim. They're all reducible to descriptive claims.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Then I think we do agree on that. But I'm just curious, does this because it sounds like to me this would entail like some level of physicalism, like even if there is like a second part, like a soul or ether or whatever the fuck is part of the brain, that would also in a sense be like understood from like an objective way. Like if there was some way we could measure that, then we could objectively figure out the normative state, even if there's like a part of it that's like separate in a sense from our understanding so far, I guess.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know, it just seems like there's an implication of physicalism, and I don't know how I would get around that. If there even is a reason to.
I don't think it entails physicalism. I'm not a physicalist, so I don't know that it has any particular entailment. What I would say is that I'm an empiricist and a pragmatist. I think that science provides our best general understanding of what the world is like from a third personal descriptive view. We have these models and they work better than other models, and we replace them over time with better models. Um, and I'm perfectly happy to say that these models are true in the appropriate contexts. But I don't think, in virtue of them being true, that they're capturing any distinct, correct metaphysical account where we understand what nature is. I think we could talk about, like, we can make predictions, we can make observations. I'm perfectly happy to talk about what there is. Like, I think there are trees, and I think there is, like, grass outside right now if I point outside. But when I make those sorts of claims, I'm not intending to express any substantive metaphysical claim. Like, I wouldn't say all of those things are physical, because I don't think that's meaningful. What I would say is physics is a really damn useful way of describing what those things are like. And that might sound pedantic.
Wait, so do you?
'Cause-
Sorry, I just love asking questions.
go for it.
So, and if this is not the way you do it, it's just because in my culture, part of active listening is interrupting with questions. If you start to
It's
like
totally fine.
okay, yeah, just making sure. I just want to make sure you didn't find that as like a rude thing or anything, because I'll stop it if it is for you. But yeah, it's just with that, it sounds like you kind of deny the idea of like physicalism slash like dual, like all this shit is kind of like meaningless to you, because like what is physical seems very arbitrary, because like one person might say what's physical is what we can measure through science, and another person would say what's physical is all that we can interact with, and then like this, like, are you like kind of are attacking that whole idea of just like breaking the world
something
down
like
into...
that. Yeah.
Oh,
so,
actually, okay. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to ask your
real quick
opinion
on
on this
this.
because
Real quick on this. If someone wants to say that what it means to say everything is physical is that everything is whatever it is that we're describing by physics, that's a little weird, because that's a moving target, and we don't have a complete physics. Like, I don't, as far as I know, we don't have, like, we have not reconciled inconsistencies in like general relativity and like quantum physics. I don't know. Some philosopher of physics, let me know, or theoretical physicist. But if that's the case, like, there are going to be inconsistencies in our current model that are not yet resolved. So they're like technically, literally false. So I don't know what to do with that.
yeah. That actually, okay. Yeah, I think we're holy shit. Okay, I feel like I'm biased because you're saying a lot of the opinions I have, so I might be biased in calling you based as shit. So, but so far, I'm not gonna lie, I'm like vibing with all this. And one of the things that I kind of like, I'm curious about your opinions on this, because this kind of has to do with the thing. It's like I don't like talking about objectivity or subjectivity or physical or non-physical. I think all that stuff's kind of dumb. What I like doing is like I recognize there are certain structures in the world, and these structures have certain patterns or relations to other structures. So instead, I just index structures to each other, right? Like what I am, like my idea of self and other is actually based on like, okay, I am a structure. What can I affect? What I can affect is essentially myself, and what I can't is effectively the other. So it creates this gradient of self and other, right? Like all of my things are kind of based on this indexing where I relate different structures. So I could even say that, hey, there might be a structure completely divorced from ours that has its own existence, has its own structures that it interacts with. Effectively, it would be like a separate universe, right? And I wouldn't have to worry about objectivity, subjectivity, or anything like that. I would just say, well, all that stuff's indexed to its own structure. Or like when I talk about the mind, I can just be like, well, if someone's having an experience, that's indexed to their like psychology and whatever. And I feel like I can get more nuance and more information out that way. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I guess it depends on what exactly you mean by indexing things and structures. I'm not really familiar with your use of that terminology.
Oh yeah, fair. I should be more specific. Sorry. Yeah. So when I refer to a structure, I'm just talking about any system that could be described in some way, right? So if I can, so hopefully, we're just going to assume that math can describe all structures here, just for sake of argument. If I could like describe some structure through a mathematical thing and it had some set of relationships between each other, between components, I would call that a structure. A structure can even be a single component with no relation to other things and just has its own internal relations. So it's effectively any entity, and I'm just drawing connections between entities where I'm like, okay, what seems like there's some sort of correlation between how this entity acts, now this entity acts. So I'm starting to draw like a line between these two structures where I'm like, okay, so it seems like there's something in this structure that's indexed to something in this structure, or there's some relation here. So I guess instead of indexing, I should say more like I tie relationships between structures, and I find that more useful than talking about objective, subjective, because I feel like that doesn't give a good idea of like what structures we're talking about.
Have you looked into structural realism at all?
I have not, but that's being put on the list.
Okay, so check that out. So there are these views, and there's some distinctions, and I'm not a philosopher of science, so I'm not going to be able to like just wing it and tell you exactly what these views are. You could look up James Ladyman's book "Everything Must Go."
Wait, give me 2 seconds. I need a pencil to write this shit down.
Sure.
Okay, got it. What's his dumbass name? Sorry, I shouldn't say that. I'm always crass.
It's Ladyman.
Lady. Oh, the conservatives aren't going to like that.
And then the book is called "Everything Must Go." I read the first chapter some years ago. I never finished the book. And the first chapter was this just sort of bulldozer against a lot of mainstream metaphysics. So it was quite a fun chapter. But yeah, so you have these accounts that would at the very least they would say something like this: look, as our scientific theories and models change, like, we have one model of what subatomic particles are like, and then we have another model, and like this classic billiards ball conception of what subatomic particles are like is not really accurate. It's not like there's little pieces of things bouncing around through space, and the more modern theories have changed our conception of what's going on. But
I would say I would actually argue a bit with that, because I would say it's altered our perception. Because usually, I think this is a misconception in science that it like jumps from idea to idea. It's actually all building on each other. Like we went from like Dalton's model to like the pudding model to like the nuclear model, and then we slowly went up to like Bohr's and then quantum and shit. So it's usually, but I get what you mean, where it's like as science changes, what it's representing is kind of like a different thing. Like the same way that like. And cut me off if I'm wrong here, because maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Well, let me just finish the thought about what the view is basically saying here. The view here is saying that what can be conserved from one model to the next are the mathematical relations in the theory. And so, there's like ontic and epistemic structural realism, and there are some differences in how metaphysically committed they are, with epistemic being a little less metaphysically committed. But what one might be able to say is, look, we can know what reality is like in some respects. We can know that the mathematical relations described by our theories are accurate and true in telling us something about the world. Even if the sort of posits of those theories, we might be a little more hesitant to say that those things exist, or that we can know about those things.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. I think like I think this kind of relates to, I think it's called in science like an effective theory, or the effective range of a theory. We say like, okay, the theory explains some relationship in reality, but only within these confines. There seems to be other stuff that's missing, but there is a relationship between how these things act within these confines, with this mathematical formula and this like actual thing happening in reality. So there is a relationship there. That is real, but what's actually happening, what that math describes, how we think about it, is always completely changing. Is that kind of the idea, or am I wrong there?
Math is always changing.
Clearly the way we express or think about the math is always changing.
Oh, right. But even if the math is conserved, so that actually sounds pretty similar, but I wouldn't be able to judge. Danny from Phil Talk might have a better sense of a lot of these views, since Danny knows more about metaphysics and probably philosophy of science than I do.
Time to annoy Danny next. You put him on my list. I'll say Lance Independent sent me.
Well, Danny, I think Danny's here, so Danny Phil Talk should be in the chat. So he's probably
Danny, get up here, you little. Actually, wait, is it? Wait, what time zone is he in? How does high school goes until 3, right? In most countries in the West. I don't remember. He's a high school teacher. Whatever.
I don't know if Danny also is up for coming up here. Danny, you could request. I'm not going to be as restrictive as you are, never letting me come up. No, Danny just had
Danny
on his TikTok a couple days ago. Okay, so is there anything else you wanted to go over? I do have a few people in my guest queue, so I could move on to the next person.
I mean, I could talk forever, but I feel like you should move on to the next person, because
we will do that.
Unfair.
We'll just cycle through.
Divination of time. Yeah.
Get the next one. Look into that stuff.
Get the cane. Pull me out. Also, sorry, I keep interrupting. Have a good one.
No, it's all good. It's all good. We'll talk another time. Thanks so much for coming up. Alrighty, next one up, Solovino.
Hello there.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing well. I'm afraid just by listening thus far, that this is you guys are just a little too smart for me. So I don't want to. I don't want to waste too much time here because I feel like I need to go do some homework before I can actually have a meaningful conversation. But maybe just really quickly, if I could get um, so I'm an atheist, but I'm still holding on to this concept of free will, and I'm sort of still holding on to this concept of moral realism in a certain way. But real quickly, if you could give me your understanding of what free will actually is, because I'm under the conception that it's, I have the right to choose, but I could have chosen otherwise. In other words, it's not something that fate is deciding for me. Like I
Mhm.
have the ability to choose something, and I'm not determined to make that actual choice, because if I'm determined, then it's not really a choice. But it seems like you're operating under a different understanding of free will, because you say it goes beyond just having a choice. So could you explain that to me and maybe dumb it down as well as you can for someone like me?
Okay, I will do my best. Let me know if because part of the issue is I'm just used to invoking all this like technical language, and a lot of it's not necessary, but I get stuck in using it, and then it's not even helpful for me communicating with people. It's unfortunate. So I'll do my best. Let me know if something is an issue. So the first thing I would say is that many philosophical disputes will center on words or terms. So you'll see philosophers arguing, like, what is knowledge? What is justice? And I take a lot of issue with this, and there is a rather storied philosophical tradition of philosophers taking issue with this, Wittgenstein being the most famous in focusing on these language problems. But there are other philosophers that have focused on language problems. The problem is that when people invoke these terms and they ask, like, what is knowledge? What is morality? What is free will? Is that the central question often ends up treating those terms as if they have rigid and fixed meanings, and that our job is to discover the correct account of these terms. And then, once we discover the correct meaning of the word or the term, free will, goodness, whatever, then we'll be in a position to know what it truly is. And I think that whole endeavor is fundamentally misguided. There is a distinction between words and the concepts to which those words refer, and I do not think that each word has a word concept one-to-one mapping relation where each word rigidly is affixed to a particular concept, and that we just need to figure out what that relation is, and then we'll know. So instead, the way I think language works is that I think language is context driven, that the words and sentences and phrases we use have no intrinsic meaning. Rather, we mean things and we use language to try to communicate what we mean. And so, really, facts about what people mean are facts about their psychology, they're facts about their goals, their intentions. And so, you can only actually understand what something like free will or goodness means in a context of usage. And so, if you want to understand what someone means by it, ask them and they should be able to tell you what they mean. I don't think there are correct meanings to words, at least not when we're talking in a philosophical context. There's a very narrow sense in which they have meanings. Now, I know a lot of that is set up, but what I'm getting at is I don't think there is any correct or canonical account of what free will is. There are various conceptions of what free will is. And if you really wanted to, you could have like free will A, free will B, free will C. I don't think any of these are correct. We would have to individually assess each one of these accounts and ask ourselves, is this a kind of free will that we have? Is this a kind of free will that has any implications we care about? And so you'd have to go through each one of those accounts of free will. Now, some of these accounts strike me as so obscure or implausible that I don't think we have that kind of free will, or at least I don't know what the people making these claims, like saying we have free will, and then they say by free will I mean this, and then they say something, it might be meaningless. Well, I don't think we have meaningless stuff. So some of those might be libertarian conceptions of free will. I don't think that those make a whole lot of sense. Some of these views are, sometimes they're straw manned or presented in a really implausible way, where they're presented as like we're free, we're exempt from like the laws of physics. Others will say that we are like the sources of our actions. I think that's a lot of those characterizations are so ambiguous and unclear that you just have to talk to the specific proponent and see what they mean. But then there's these compatibilist views. Are you familiar with compatibilism, like that notion in the free will debates?
So compatibilism, sort of the mind body sort of thing, or
No, it's not that. So
like
one of the
the
biggest dispute in free will historically has been whether or not determinism is true, and if so, whether it would or wouldn't be compatible with free will. And so the big dispute is, if determinism is true, could we still have free will? That's like the biggest dispute. Now, I don't think it's the most important dispute. If you look at the 2020 Phil Paper survey, the majority of philosophers, I think it was 56%, I'd have to check, endorse compatibilism, meaning that they think that if determinism was true, we could still have free will. That doesn't mean they think determinism is true. It just means they think that if determinism were true, we would still have free will. So free will and determinism are compatible. Then a smaller subset believe in libertarian free will, and they often endorse an incompatibilist view. They think that if determinism was true, we couldn't have free will. But fortunately, it's false. So we do have free will. And then you have incompatibilists that deny that we have free will. So they agree with the libertarian free will advocates, and they say, if determinism was true, we couldn't have free will. It is true, and so we don't have free will. So those are the main positions. If determinism was true, we couldn't have free will. And then some say it is true, so we don't have free will. And then others say it isn't true and we do have free will. And then there are some that say they could both be true at the same time. Does that make sense?
I mean, as far as my ability to understand what you're saying, yes. What's interesting is
Fair
I
enough.
graduated with a degree in philosophy and religion. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't excel in it, and then I went back and I got a degree in Spanish, and so now I'm a Spanish teacher, and so I really jive with what you're saying when it comes down to words being things that are being like they belong to the users, and it's our job to sort of try to understand what the other person means and
Mm-hmm.
nail every word down to mean this is what it has to mean. I tell people all the time, just because a dictionary tells you that's what the word means, what we're really saying is that used. We're not saying that it's
Yep.
we're the ones that construct the meaning. We're the ones that write the dictionaries in a sense. So I totally understand that. So I guess my final question before I get off here, because I think you've given me enough to think on for now, is so earlier when you said that you didn't believe in punishing people just for the sake of because they deserved it, or they did something bad and you're trying to get back on me, that there needs to be some sort of there needs to be some sort of good, and you use that word good that comes about it. Now I think I understand. When you say good, you're not talking about some sort of an objective good. You're talking about what is sort of like basically a relativist good for you personally. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, basically, I want the world to be a certain way, and I favor a legal system that brings about the kind of world that I want.
I think that is a completely honest and fair approach. I don't know if I would have a rebuttal for that, and it would be silly for me to try. So thank you for your conversation today, and I will consider what you've said and try to maybe try to read up on some of this stuff a little more in depth, because it does come up a lot in my debates with people. Because I'll debate people, and I'm an atheist, and I usually talk about whether or not going to hell is a choice. And people say,
Mm-hmm.
well, of course it's a choice. And I'm like, well, if I really understood that it was a true place where I was going to go and be eternally upset, if I wouldn't ever choose that. I would never choose what's not in my best interest. And so the reason I don't believe it's a choice is because it doesn't seem like it's real to me. And so therefore if I choose between Coke and Pepsi, I can see both, I can experience both Coke and Pepsi. And at least I have some sort of a sense that they're real. But when it comes to heaven and hell, I'm like, I understand what you mean by the concept, but I don't really believe it's a choice, because I don't really believe it's a thing that exists. And so how can I choose one or the other? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go ahead and drop, and I'm going to add you, because interesting stuff, Lance. So
Awesome. Thank you.
and I hope you run into someone who gives you a little bit more hell than I did, so you can stick it to them, man. All right, have a good one.
All right. Appreciate it. Take care. All right. Let's see if we got any other requests in the queue. Oh, we got a couple of them. MK, I think that we talked yesterday, or was it the day before? I don't know. We talked recently, right?
Yeah, yeah, we actually talked yesterday on objective morality and stuff.
Cool.
Yeah, how are
How's it
you?
going?
It's going good. I was just wanted to come up to discuss. Well, I have two things I want to discuss: the free will part and the problem of evil stuff with God. Um, so I wanted to briefly first, I guess we'll start by asking, why do you think evil is a problem for God? Because for me, like, the only way evil can be a problem of God for God is if you show that it's not logically possible for evil to exist and God still, be a moral agent. What do you think
Mhm.
about that?
Yeah, so there's is this like the evidential problem of evil and the logical problem of evil. I am no the first thing to say is, am I blinking out of the camera there? I gotta I gotta get it to recognize me.
Yep.
Um, so I should say the best person to talk to about this on TikTok is Danny Philtalk, who I don't know, he might still be in the chat. So if you really want to talk to someone that is much more of an expert, Danny is going to be that expert. I put that topic up there. That I will talk about it, but it's way outside my areas of expertise because my areas of expertise are largely in experimental philosophy and then a little bit in metaethics.
Hmm.
And I've written a little bit about free will, but problem of evil and theological problems are like I don't study those formally. So
Okay.
all that being said, um, so there's a couple things. I mean, the first is I don't think that it being a logical problem of evil is the only way to raise concerns about the existence of evil or more generally suffering. One might argue that if you look out at the world we see around us, that the kinds of suffering and evil that we observe is gratuitous. There's too much of it. It's more than what we would expect if God had the properties that are classically attributed to him, which is all good, all knowing, all powerful.
Hmm.
So there are those sorts of arguments, and they might turn on a sort of abductive argument that would say, look, given what the world is like, the best explanation for that is that there is no God, or at least no God that exhibits those particular characteristics.
Hmm.
You can also have a logical problem of evil. And Danny from Field Talk actually defends the logical problem of evil. I had always heard from Christian apologists that it's been defeated or nobody really takes it seriously. But after listening to Danny a whole lot, I'm not so convinced that that's the case. So I wouldn't say I'm all in partisan of the logical problem of evil actually posing a definitive problem for those who think that there's an all knowing, all powerful, all good God. But the kinds of responses I've seen to it so far have not struck me as particularly convincing. So, very roughly, the concern there would just be, just to sort of lay out the initial concern, would be if there is a being that genuinely is all good, all knowing, and all powerful, and it loves us all, and it wants to create this world, it seems a little weird that there's any suffering at all in the world, that there's any evil, that anybody harms anybody, because I would have thought that if this God is all knowing, all powerful, and all good, it's only going to bring about things that it wants to bring about. And so it would appear that this God wants these terrible things to happen, or thinks that it's good that these terrible things happen. And that seems like a problem to me.
Well, I think it's a matter of, like, preserving the greater good, right? Because obviously God can actualize good, but is it actually going to be the greatest good that he can bring about? And if the greatest good is only, that he can bring about is only possible by virtue of evil or a certain amount of evil existing,
Mm-hmm.
um, then I don't really think that's much of an issue. Um, to me, like, good and evil almost is like a duality, right? Something could be only good by virtue of there being evil to, have some sort of reference point of comparison, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I do, but I don't think that that's true. I don't think there has to be any evil. Like I would say this, and maybe you disagree. I don't think there needs to be any evil for there to be good. I think everything could be good all the time, and there's never any evil. And I don't think that there's any logical issue with that.
Well, let me ask you this: do you think the value of good goes up if evil exists?
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, there might be local context in which it goes up, but I don't think all things considered that you need evil for there to be good.
But like, here's like an analogy I could give. Like, some people only learn to appreciate the things that they have when they understand, not having them, right? So it's sort of like
Hmm.
so it's sort of like in that instance, right? People learn to appreciate what scenario they're in when they were already in a scenario that was much worse.
I agree with that, but I think that's a contingent feature of the way that human psychology works. In principle, God could just make people that completely appreciate all the good things that they have. They
Well,
don't. I don't think
I don't
people.
know
I
if
don't
that,
think it's like. Let me put it this way. I don't think it's logically necessary for people to suffer or experience evil in order to appreciate anything.
well, I think it's more of like an epistemic problem because I can say like, okay, well, I don't think it's logically necessary for God to not actualize evil. So it's just like when we say those things, it's like it's almost a standstill, right? It's almost standstill because yeah, sure, I grant the idea. I can't show that it's logically necessary for evil to exist, but I think that also exists on the other side, right? You can show that it's logically necessary for evil to not exist, and to me, I wanted to brush up on the unnecessary suffering you were talking about.
Mm.
And I think it's a really important issue because when you say there's unnecessary suffering, there needs to be some sort of reference point to evaluate the suffering on a scale to say, okay, well, it's clearly over what it needs to be. But if you have no epistemic reference point to even draw that sort of conclusion to begin with, I'm just confused on like how you would get to like at what point it's unnecessary. Is it just when like you have some personal attitudes or
Yeah, so it's the sort of issue where I don't think that a person needs a precise boundary. So, I mean, we encounter these sorts of issues all the time in everyday life. If I go to a restaurant, and think about this yourself, you go to a restaurant and you order mashed potatoes, and they bring out a 40-pound bowl of mashed potatoes. Would you say that's too much mashed potatoes?
Yeah. I would say it's too much, but that's only you can only draw that conclusion when you have reference point, right? You already have an experience of what you can, how much mashed potatoes you can eat. So then you can say it's unnecessary because less mashed potatoes is sufficient. But in the problem of evil, right? You don't know how much evil is sufficient to preserve the most good. So you wouldn't actually be able to make that claim.
I agree. It's a more challenging issue than saying 40 pounds of mashed potatoes is way too much mashed potatoes. It's more challenging. I don't think that the fact that it's challenging, and my point with the mashed potatoes was to if I say what about 20 pounds, what about 3 pounds, what about 1 pound, I don't think that there's any precise point at which you would say that's the exact point. Like one dollop extra of mashed potatoes is too many. Rather, I think that there's a sort of crude sense that it cannot be fully articulated as any sort of like precise boundary line. And so I think the absence of precise thresholds or boundaries doesn't like refute the idea. I do think it's a lot murkier what would be too much. Note though that I'm not even endorsing here the evidential problem of evil. I'm actually fine talking about the logical problem of evil. One moment.
Okay.
Sorry, I am back. I got a call. I didn't I didn't know calls would just straight up interrupt TikTok, so that was a little weird.
Yeah, no, it's
I'm
okay.
back.
Yeah.
Basically, I think what someone if that's going to support this kind of argument would do is they'd say, look, give me all your theodicies for the certain kinds of suffering and evil that you think are consistent with an all-knowing, all-powerful. Let's just say God. So by God, I'm just going to mean for the purposes of discussion, unless we otherwise specify, the sort of classical omni-God, all good, all-powerful, all-knowing, because I don't want to have to keep saying that. Okay, so someone might say, hey, some amount of suffering is necessary as a means of achieving good outcomes. Maybe it's involved in soul building. Maybe it's a result of our free choices, and God needs to give us free will for the greater good. And then, yeah, I think you would look at that and you'd say, okay, so sometimes people hurt other people, they lie to other people. Sometimes people suffer through hardships and challenges. They don't get the job they wanted. But then you look at stuff like millions of people were unalived, and they didn't have an opportunity to build their souls. They were just unalived. So the kinds of explanations one would give to justify certain types or instances of suffering and evil, one could say, okay, well, even if we account for that, there's a remainder. There is additional suffering on top of that that doesn't seem to be readily accommodated. So one example would be all of the suffering of animals. animal, like if animals don't have souls, then all their suffering isn't soul building. If animals don't have free will, then their suffering isn't a result of the exercise of their free will. And all these animals are harming each other, or they're harmed by the environment. Why that? That doesn't seem necessary for, like, if the earth is a testing ground for human souls and it's all about, us finding and coming to know God, why do all the animals have to suffer? And I've never heard a good explanation for that. I've heard people tell me that there's a Christian apologist that has a whole book on this. So I don't know what their argument is.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of thing where I think someone could reasonably at least propose. There seems to be these sorts of suffering and evil that don't seem to be readily accommodated by the sort of conventional theodicies that would justify certain amounts of and types of suffering.
Yeah, I mean, I think the questions you pose are very, very powerful, right? I do think those questions are important. But I do want to get clear on a particular thing. Like, even if there's no Christian who can answer those questions, right? It doesn't show that, it doesn't follow that, the problem of evil is actually true, right? Because there's the ability to justify things, right, via like some sort of epistemic access to the content of those, and then there's the truth in and of itself, right? If the Kalam cosmological argument fails to prove God, right, it doesn't show that God doesn't exist, right? It just shows that the argument failed to justify it. And so, to take that extra step and to say, okay, well, no Christian can actually, propose actually good justification for this, and then jumping and then saying, well, therefore the problem of evil is true, then it seems to take that extra jump. You have to show why, like, necessarily, right, the problem of evil. It's not logically possible for God to remain consistent, and that's going to be a very hard, almost untenable position to really hold, I guess.
I don't think that it is. If you want to see someone that can formalize the inconsistency that they think that there is, I would encourage you to talk to Danny about it. But very roughly, what I would say is, I think if there is a God, that being would not want anything bad to happen, and it appears bad things happen. So there is no God.
Well, if you accept those, that following, then like, sure, but like, your idea of like what makes the most good God could be, misunderstood.
It could be. Yeah, it could be. So I wouldn't rule out as like an epistemic possibility that I could just be mistaken. So, of course, that there's a possibility that the kinds of suffering and evil that we observe are consistent with the existence of God. What I would like to hear but like my current view is that doesn't seem to me to be the case. It looks like there's an inconsistency there. If someone wants to try to convince me otherwise, I'm open to that. But I don't expect anyone to just grant what I take to be an inconsistency to be an inconsistency, because they're just going to disagree with what I take to be an inconsistency. So if I say, hey, if there was a God, they're going to actualize exactly whatever their will is, and they wouldn't will there to be any suffering. So there's the fact that their suffering is inconsistent with the existence of such a God. They're just going to disagree. They're just going to say, they might say that, what we observe is consistent with the will of such a being. And then that's I guess where the debate would ensue. So even if I gave someone a syllogism where I'm like, look, premise 1, premise 2, with the conclusion, therefore God doesn't exist, they're just going to reject one of the premises. They're not just, no one's going to be compelled by the syllogism.
True.
So, we're just going to have to argue about what kinds of things we would expect to be consistent with God.
Yeah, but like because obviously if I think God is like the originator, the progenitor of morality, or maybe goodness itself, right? It's sort of like, I don't believe that people have the epistemic baggage to even attempt to evaluate the morality of God's actions, right? Because we'd be evaluating it from like a subjective moral standpoint. And us humans don't even agree on like morals as it is, right? So sort of expecting there to be like some divine creator that aligns with all of our moral intuitions, I don't think that's expected. I think it's actually the opposite. By virtue of us having free will, I know this is, you don't believe that, but at least under my belief, I think by virtue of us having free will, it's necessary that we all disagree, right? Because we're all different, and if we all disagree, then there can't be one God that aligns with all of our moral intuitions, because we differ in terms of moral intuitions.
Well, couldn't God just make us all have the same moral intuitions?
I'm not even sure if that's possible, because that could be an issue for free will,
Why would that be an issue for free will?
because of God's determining our psychological process.
Well, do you think our psychological processes are not determined?
No, I don't think they're like yeah, I'm not a determinist, like, or
Okay.
necessarily.
So part of the issue here would just be like your taste preferences. Do you choose your taste preferences?
Okay, so there's a difference between us choosing, right, and those, because obviously the way that we developed as humans, we didn't choose that, correct? But that's not to say that it was necessary the way that we developed. Like, there are things that are out of control.
Sure.
There are things that are out of control, but I don't think that's a problem for free will.
I wouldn't think that it's a problem for free will either. But if it's not a problem for free will, then it shouldn't be an issue for God to determine what our preferences are,
Well,
because it's not threatening free will. So God could just give us all the same preferences.
okay, I'm confused.
Let me give an example. What if God made it so that all humans, in virtue of their underlying biology, they don't like chocolate, but they do like vanilla? Would that threaten people's free will? If everybody liked vanilla and nobody liked chocolate?
So, I'm not too sure, right? Because, like, I'm of the belief that, like, certain things are out of our control, but I do think our actions influence the way we develop. Like, I'm a personal believer in that our experience affects the way that we develop psychologically and physically, and then, like, obviously our choices that we choose to make in that experience is an additive factor in which can, change us physically and psychologically. Like, for example, if you chose to eat ramen noodles for like 50 years, it's a good chance that you're gonna, be super unhealthy, and that's like a free will choice that affects both the psychological and the physical state of the human body. So I don't think it's completely out of our control, but I do think there are some reasons for why, partially our choices for why we have certain preferences.
Yeah, I just don't think that people need to have differences in their intuitions or their values or their preferences or their desires or really anything in order for them to have free will. Let me walk you through why I think that's the case with a kind of intuition pump. So like currently on Earth, there's like 8 billion something people, and we have a lot of different moral intuitions. Now, do you think it's possible that there could be some catastrophic event that wipes out the vast majority of humanity? It's not a trick question.
Yeah, I think it's possible.
Okay, now suppose that occurs and one scientist in a secret underground bunker survives, and they have a certain set of preferences. So like they like cilantro, they don't like ice cream. They have all their preferences, right? And that scientist in their underground bunker makes 8 billion clones of themselves that are all neurologically identical to them, and then they release them back into the world. So now we've replaced the 8 billion people on Earth with 8 billion clones of that scientist. All of those clones would have the same exact preferences as that scientist. Would they have free will?
Would they have free will and they're identical to the original?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good question. I'm honestly not too sure. Like, and I'm not trying to run away from the question. Like, I'm not too sure. Like, I probably genuinely have to think about it. What do you
That's
think?
fair. Yeah, I think so I don't believe in free will, but I don't see any logical inconsistency with them all having free will. In other words, I don't think there's any logical issue with there being a world in which beings have free will, but they have no differences in their preferences, actions, desires, or anything like that. I don't think variation in preferences or intuitions is a requirement for free will for there to be free will or for any given agent to have free will.
Here's my position, because I'm not saying like there is a problem for free will necessarily. I'm just saying like I'm more saying like that could pose a problem for free will, and if it's the case that it does, then that can be a reason for why God acts in a particular way contrary to that outcome. Because my whole thing, I said this earlier, I think that me, you, people with like finite knowledge, I think we have only so much epistemic, equipment to judge and make claims about God, right? You to make certain statements about God, you have to start with certain presuppositions, and then but if as soon as you like sort of question those, you're not going to really be able to justify because it's just like sort of grounded by your individual intuition. But if there are people that differ in those intuitions and have different presuppositions or in starting principles to evaluate God, then there's no really a symmetry breaker between you and the next guy who has a different intuition and feels he's justified in saying that God is a particular way.
Okay, so what are we disagreeing about? So I appreciate you sharing your view, but I'm looking for where the conflict between us would be.
The conflict is, I feel like for there to be a problem of evil, you have to show why to me it's a logical issue. Because if it's not a logical issue, then it's in a possible world, right? God can remain consistent with his nature and actualize all these events. That's my view. And then like where the disagreement is you feel like you have the ability to make claims that there is an issue of evil. I'm assuming that is what you believe. You do feel that you have enough to sort of evaluate God, right?
I would say, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and so I'm not. I definitely don't believe that I can, nor do I think anyone can, because you could always posit some sort of epistemic possibility in which there is some lack of information on your side, and you're just coming to some sort of like premature judgment, right? And so God's knowledge is infinite, if he does exist, obviously. Our knowledge is finite. There are an infinite number of ways in which you could be wrong. And it's just like, to me, it seems, no offense, just a tiny bit arrogant to make claims like, oh, there's a problem of evil.
Yeah, I I appreciate that you said no offense, but I'd like to digress to address that. I'm not a huge fan of people making charges of arrogance. What do you mean by arrogant in this context?
It actually, I think arrogant has like a bit of a negative connotation. I don't think that's the right word. I think it just means too much. I think a better word would be too much confidence.
Okay, so overconfidence. Yeah, because arrogance is like this like unjustified overconfidence that carries connotations that a person is like I don't know, punching above their weight, and you may intend to suggest that. But on my view, I'm not doing anything that I think is unjustified. So just saying I'm overconfident or not justified, I think gets the job done without carrying negative connotations about character.
Well, if you want to just say that like what you're doing aligns with your own in particular beliefs, well then, of course it does. That's why you're doing it. But my point is that if there's infinite amount of epistemic ways you could be wrong in this scenario, misunderstanding or lacking the information, I would more not make a definite claim that you're overconfident. Obviously, I believe you are, but I would ask, why do you have this confidence?
Yeah, I mean, so in this sort of case, I don't see this as substantially different from any other case where I would be looking for logical consistency. And part of my concern with raising like, hey, there's an epistemic possibility, like it's possible that what you see as a logical inconsistency actually isn't a logical inconsistency. That is one of those kinds of points that I think one could say proves too much. One could raise that point for almost any issue in which a person is purporting to have to be pointing to some sort of logical inconsistency by saying, hey, it may appear logically consistent, but there's an epistemic possibility that you've misunderstood something, and that in virtue of your misunderstanding, it's not logically inconsistent. That strikes me as trivially true of literally anything I could say, unless I thought I was infallible, and I certainly don't. So I like, if one of the things that you would want to point out, it would be something like, hey, you could be mistaken. That's all that objection seems to me to amount to. And of course I could be mistaken.
Well, I agree
so
that you could. Oh, my bad.
Are you making a stronger claim than that I could be mistaken?
Well, that would definitely be part of it. Like, if there's a possibility in which you're wrong, you most definitely could be mistaken.
Well,
But
right, but of course I'm going to agree with that. Like, I don't think I'm infallible. That'd be insane.
True, and I appreciate you agreeing with that. But my point is that evaluating something such as God is a bigger hurdle than, evaluating whether a triangle has three sides, right?
I agree with that too. Yeah. So like I'm a lot more confident that like triangles don't have 14 sides than that the existence of suffering and evil is inconsistent with God. I
Yeah,
agree
so
with that.
that's
But
what I'm
it's like
saying.
it's a relative degree of confidence. Like I like my the probability of the former like is asymptotically approaches one. It's like 0.999999999. And the confidence I would have for the God thing would be lower than that, but it would still be very high. That might still be overconfident, but like why should I think I'm overconfident about this?
Well, because evaluating God is a completely different issue.
Well, I agree,
Because,
but why would that mean that I'm
because
overconfident?
if it's
I
the
mean, you
if
don't
it's
actually know how confident I am. I mean, for starters.
well, I think it's very fairly confident if you're willing to, label it like, oh, I have these views, evil is a problem for God. You're at least confident to accept the that claim, which is
Sure,
enough.
but let's say my credence, like I thought the probability I was right was like 50.001%.
Well, then I'll change that 1%.
Well, maybe so. So if maybe that's even too overconfident, right? So you could think that me believing this at all is too confident because I'm not justified in believing it, and that's fair. But one thing I want to flag here is that I'm not making any claim to be some sort of like note what I said at the outset. So I mean several caveats. One of them is that I'm not a specialist in this area, and the other is that after listening to Danny Phil talk about this, I became increasingly confident that there's something to this. But what I didn't do is come in like, swinging myself around saying this is definitely true and anybody that disagrees
Yeah.
is dumb. I wasn't doing that. So the charge of overconfidence, I think, should at the very least be mitigated by the appreciation that what I'm not doing is saying I'm absolutely right and everybody that disagrees is like dumb and wrong. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you, and I'm thankful that you're not doing that because a lot of people especially on this app do that. And I don't want to make it seem like I'm like insulting you when you're saying you're overconfident.
Oh, I'm not insulted by it at all. I think it's totally appropriate to address. I wanted to flag that meta discourse issue just because I think that term arrogance might be overused or misused in certain contexts.
Yeah.
And I think that you very quickly clarified here's what you mean. And even if you mean something that is partially impugning my character in virtue of my epistemic practices, that's fine because I think you're doing so in a way that's like acceptably modest. You're not saying so that's fine. Don't worry about it.
Because my belief is that everyone is overconfident with particular, at least in one area of their life, right? Just like we just happen to be discussing one, I believe it, you have in this instance, but I don't think it's like crazy. I think I'm not going to say that you're unjustified in believing this.
Well, I might be.
You could be, it's possible, but do you want to switch gears to the free will stuff?
Sure, we could do that.
Okay. Okay. So so this is like nobody has free will. This is independent from any sort of theological stuff, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. Basically, I take free will to be this philosophical term of art that philosophers talk about. I think it has theological underpinnings, and I think in contemporary discourse, it's used to refer to this special sort of relation between our agentic capacities, like our decision making capacities, and the degree to which we are appropriate subjects of praise and blame. So, in other words, I am just running with the conception of free will in the current philosophical literature, analytic philosophical literature, which is that free will is like that set of agential capacities that are necessary for desert-based moral responsibility. And I just don't think that there is desert-based moral responsibility, so I don't think that we have free will.
You want to try to simplify that? I don't think I'll follow.
Sure. So basically, okay, people make decisions, people do stuff, and some people might say, hey, certain sorts of things that certain sorts of people do, they should be punished for those things. And other things that they do, they should be praised about those things. And how do we decide when people should and shouldn't be punished or praised? Well, we have to look at certain features of their agentic capacities, like the way in which they go about deliberating and making decisions. If a person is forced to do something, like they're compelled to do it, like a scientist puts a chip in their brain and they control them like a puppet, and then the person goes and they steal from a bank. Okay, well that person was being controlled by somebody else. So I wouldn't hold that person responsible. I wouldn't say what they did is blameworthy. They're being coerced against their will. But if a person thought through, hey, I want more money. That bank has a lot of money. I understand if I get caught, I would get punished and I might go to prison, but I'm going to do it anyway. And they're fully in their capacities. They're not taking a bunch of drugs. No one's coercing them. They decide that it would be consistent with their own goals and values to go and do that. Then we might say that person's blameworthy. They deserve punishment. And so what free will would be is whatever it is about the psychology of that person compared to the other person that makes it appropriate to punish that second person, but not the first person. That's what free will is. That's what I take it to be.
Okay. So let me just try to uh give my understanding of what you said. Are you just saying like free will doesn't exist for some people because there are particular people who have like unhindered mental states? By
No. I don't think some people have free will and some people don't, if that's what you mean. What I think is that the very notion of free will is just sort of nonsensical, and that if you disambiguate what's meant by free will, we either have free will, but in a way that's completely trivial and uninteresting, or it's not even clear what's being asserted. And there might be cases where it is meaningful and it's not trivial, but it's just false that we have it. So I tend to use this trilemma. And I think that this is true of moral realism. I also think it's true of free will, that all versions of free will are trivial, false, or unintelligible.
Mhm. Okay, okay. So what if we took a definition like of free will that was just like somebody has the ability to choose to do something?
Yeah, then I think that we have that. I make choices all the time. I'm choosing to talk to you right now.
But
That
I
doesn't
feel
strike me
like
as very interesting.
but the main thing that people like to throw is that it's undetermined, right? So like it's not determined by something else, right? The choice that you made to talk to me today wasn't determined by some law of reality, right? You willingly chose to speak to me today. Now, and it could be the case that you willingly chose by you being influenced by some sort of chemical process in your brain. But that's not to say that that chemical process determined you speaking to me today, if you get what I mean.
Okay, yeah. So then, if we're building it, so if it's just people choose things, then I think we do that. If people choose things and some of those choices are at least partially not determined, now I'm not. I don't know if that's true or false. I don't know what relation that has to free will. Are you stipulating that free will is just partially undetermined or fully undetermined choice?
Well, because I don't think, because there's a say that something's influencing you and then something determine you. Like you can have
Hmm.
someone influence you and it still not be enough for it to occur, right? Nor you can also have someone influencing you and you do what they're influencing you to do, but it doesn't mean that the influence determined you doing that thing. It just means that increased the likelihood of you. And then do you want to do that?
Okay.
And so,
So I'm a little concerned about undetermined choice. If I make decisions randomly rather than them being determined, would that mean that I have free will?
um. I think that you can have free will as long as it's not determined. That's what my view is. Now there can be a a lot of things that influence you, but my key thing is that you're not determined.
Okay, so you can have free will if it's not determined, but the mere fact that it's not determined doesn't guarantee or entail that you have free will. Is that correct?
Well, no. Like if you're not determined, you have free will. You are
Okay,
determined.
so it doesn't. So let me ask again then. So let's say we have a person whose decisions are not determined. So like let's just say they're not even subject to the laws of physics. They actually just make decisions randomly. Does
Well,
that person have free will?
I don't think the laws of physics determine you, so I wouldn't accept that idea. Like I would say they influence you. And influence is
Okay.
deterministic.
What I'm asking though is if a person's decisions were made randomly, would that person have free will?
Oh yeah, that would be like free will on a very high scale. Like,
Really? So to me, I don't even that doesn't strike me as being a acceptable conception of free will. I mean, if you want to say that if a person made random decisions that they had free will, fine, we could go with that. Then I think it's possible that people make could make random decisions. I don't see a problem with that. I don't know that anybody does.
Well, I
So
don't.
then it might just be a question about, I don't know if it'd be a scientific question. I don't even know if it's a way of, if there's any way of demonstrating that. Like, does anyone make decisions randomly? So then we
I
would just shift over to
I
that sort
don't
of
I don't
discussion.
think I don't think it's like completely random. I think there are these like compounding factors that heavily influence, like heavily super influence, but not determine. Right? It doesn't make it so it's certain that someone does a particular action. Now what?
So let me ask you this: what do you think goes on with like actual humans? Like, so out, like, do you think people's decisions are not fully determined?
No, no, I don't think they're fully. I just think there are a bunch of things that influence.
So maybe we need to dig, because you keep bringing up influence. Um, okay, so when I make decisions, if it, what how would you understand it to say that my decisions were determined? If they were determined, what would that mean?
There's some sort of necessary causal chain that entails you doing something.
Okay, when you say necessary, what exactly is necessary?
Like like let's say there's some like neurological process in your brain, right? And then like whatever the causal chain is behind that neurological process, it necessarily guarantees the case that the outcome in which the information that travels through the neurons will bring about the action.
Okay, so I just want to be clear to distinguish fatalism from determinism, because fatalism might say that some given state of affairs will necessarily occur, or a given set of events will necessarily take place. Like, basically, that a given causal chain is necessary. But I understand determinism to be a bit more modest of a claim, which is that conditional on a given antecedent set of conditions, some set of events necessarily follows. So, are you talking about the latter or the former?
Um, I guess I'm not too very keen on fatalism. That just sounds like another word to say necessitarianism. To me, is that an accurate picture?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with the terminology. I don't know.
Oh, the necessitarian is that everything's necessary.
Okay, sounds pretty similar to that. I mean, I don't know if they're the same thing.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'm not too sure. I mean, like I usually say people are just like they have free will if they're not determined by something. I mean, unless you want to go the compatibilist way and say like, okay, well, only humans are determined for some reason, then I can be like, okay, sure, we're not talking about some fatalism or necessitarianism stuff.
Okay,
Um,
so let's set aside that issue. I'm not sure. I, I'm not sure I'm understanding what the difference is between something being determined and something being influenced. So what is influence?
Influence raises the probability of you doing something, or can raise the probability of you doing something. Like for example, if we're at the pier at night, let's say we're some dumb teenagers, and we're all at the pier and stuff, and all my friends are like jump, 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 jump. Like that would be a key, very normal instance of like someone being influenced, right? A lot of times those type of pressure can raise the probability of a person doing something even if they don't actually do it. So rather than opposed to you saying jump and that just like determines that I fly into the into the water, there's a clear distinction. I guess I would say.
So we may have a different conception of probability, because I don't think probability is an intrinsic feature of events that occur in the world. I see probability as an epistemic consideration. So probability can only be understood as a type of degree of confidence that agents have with respect to future possibilities or their ability to make accurate predictions. And so I don't think that, like, like, in a certain kind of technical sense, I don't think that anything can raise the probability of an outcome happening. It either will cause it to happen or it won't cause it to happen.
But that doesn't that sort of like insert that kind of inserts um It's a very plain way of looking at things, I will say, like just like it either will cause it or it won't. Like sure, it is the case that it either will or it won't, but it doesn't mean that like that thing alone was the causal determinant for why it occurred.
Well, sure. So it may be that certain sorts of factors are not sufficient to cause something to occur. So it could be that, like, if you tap a window once, that's not sufficient to break the window. But if you tap it 100 times, that is sufficient to break the window. But then we could just disambiguate those two things and say, if you tap the window once, it will not break the window. If you tap it 100 times, it will break the window. It's just there's going to be certain sets of events cause other sorts of events. This notion of influence that you're talking about, it sounds like it relies on this notion of the probabilities being some sort of like having some sort of ontological status, like they're part of the world. And if that's the case, then I just don't think that there is influence.
Real quick, so do you think that you knocking on the window twice and not breaking, and then you knocking on it 100 times, shows that the necessary threshold to bring about a broken window is 100 knocks? Is that
Well,
right?
that would I'm using 101. I mean, there would be some fact of the matter about what conditions would break the window and what conditions wouldn't break the window. I could just stipulate what they are for the sake of argument.
You don't have to. I'm just more saying like that kind of inserts the net, like there are some necessary conditions to me, which seems, I don't want to be hasty about this, but almost
It
begging.
really depends what you mean by necessary, because like I'm not saying it's like logically necessary. You could say it's like nomologically necessary or something like that. There's going to be some like conditional on there being a law that one could describe mathematically. Then you could say these are the consequence of that law under these circumstances.
Well, when you say nomological, that just makes me think that like we're talking about laws that are subject to change and that are not determinate. Is that, do you share that sort of
No, no,
same?
no. What I'm saying is something like this. Like there are going to be certain sorts of compounds that you get when you combine one element with another one. So I would just say, conditional on that being the case, that this element has this set of properties and this other element has this other set of properties. And there's this other relational fact about what happens when you combine the two. When you combine the two, you get that particular outcome. You don't get another outcome. You don't combine, carbon and oxygen and get, I don't know, deuterium or something.
Yeah.
If they're conditional on there being law-like relations, then there are law-like relations. I'm saying something that I take to be fairly trivial.
Well, the that what you're saying does kind of assume that the laws of physics aren't really subject to change. Like, sure, we could do experiments and then make predictions for the future. But like, like, let's say we make predictions and
I'm not making assumptions about what the world is like. I'm saying conditional on the laws being a certain way, then certain things would follow from those laws. That's all. I'm not saying that the laws are static and they never change. I'm just not making any additional claims like that.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. But then if you're not making any additional claims beyond that, then how does that show that like the neurological process in someone's brain does, like, there are some conditions that bring about an outcome? Like,
I'm not claiming anything here. I'm just trying to understand the distinction you're making between
oh, okay.
determinism and influence.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so when I say probability, it's just like I'm just describing something. Like I'm not when I say probability, it just increases the likelihood of something coming about, right? So
Right. That's going to be an issue for me, though, because increasing likelihood, I only understand to be an epistemic property. Like it's a feature of our, like what's likely given what we know about the world. If one was omnipotent, omniscient, one wouldn't speak of probabilities. One would just know what would and wouldn't occur,
well,
at least conditional on a given set of facts.
that's not necessarily true. Like there are particular theologians who use quantum mechanics to argue that the universe is indeterministic, and for any given cause, there can be 10 effects, right? And there's like sort of this like random property in the universe, and that could still exist even if we had an omnipotent
Right.
being.
And then you could have a universe where some things are unpredictable or indeterminate. I don't believe that that's true, but it could be true.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's going to you could speak in terms of there being things that like, I mean, it could be true that there are events that are not guaranteed to occur given some initial set of conditions. In that case, we're like talking about a world where determinism is not true. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
Um, are you talking about like a hypothetical? Like, is this the
Yeah,
world?
like hypothetically, there could be worlds where future events are not necessitated by antecedent conditions.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay, so I don't know how, like, and maybe one, so at the very least, what I might say is that, like, you can't have influence. The type of influence you're describing doesn't make any sense in a deterministic world. It might make sense in this other sort of world, but then
Wait,
I don't
can I
like
clarify real quick?
increase the probability. Like, is that following some sort of law? Like I'm still not really understanding what you mean by influence.
Real quick. So in a world where everything's determined, probability does not exist. That does not exist. There is just what is happened and what doesn't. So I would
Well,
100.
I only that like something like I would say like intrinsic probability. I would still speak of probability. Like, so if this world is deterministic, I still think that like gambling can take place and someone can say I'm not sure, or what's the probability. And when you roll dice, the probability of a six-sided die landing on a one is approximately 1 in 6. Like, I think all that would be true due to the uncertainty of the agent with respect to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
rolling of the
epistemic.
die.
It'll be an
Cool.
epistemic
Okay.
purely. Yeah. So I 100% agree with that. Yeah, and there's a lot of like speak about, in quantum mechanics. I don't know if you know it's like quantum randomness, right?
Hmm.
Quantum particles. At least with the quantum, I'm not a quantum physicist. At least what they say, there's a lot of implications that things on the quantum level are indeterministic, or it shows things that we would expect to be indeterminate.
Yeah, the one thing I would say about that, also not a quantum physicist, is that it's not some sort of established fact that at the quantum level things are indeterministic. There are proponents in theoretical physicists and stuff that are proponents of views according to which things at least could be deterministic. So you're going to have like hidden variable views. You're going to have a many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, and in those views, things can be deterministic.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen, the explanations of like the observations in quantum mechanics that posit some sort of like hidden variable, they kind of seem to be a little bit ad hoc. Um,
I don't know if they are or not. I'm not a quantum physicist.
yeah, me neither. I'm just regurgitating stuff that I heard, but um, yeah, yeah. So I guess I want to get a clarifying question. So don't you think to make the claim nobody has free will, you have to sort of assume that the quantum mechanics, stuff is resolved to like the term
No.
determinism?
So my I don't think determinism or indeterminism has much to do with whether people have free will. You could stipulate a like if you just stipulate, hey, we would have free will if determinism is false. Like free will is just choices made in under circumstances in which those choices are not determined. Then I think it's possible for us to have free will of that kind. I wouldn't know if we did or not.
Okay.
Um, but like as I said, my technical view is that all accounts of free will are trivial, false, or unintelligible. Trivial accounts could be true. I just would consider them trivial, and then we'd have to get into why I think that. I don't know if the account that you're presenting I would consider to be trivial, or whether I would think it would fall onto one of the other horns of the trilemma. I don't know, or maybe you would just convince me and it doesn't fall on any, and I'm wrong. But yeah, I don't think that the concerns about quantum mechanics are like undermining my claim that there's no free will.
Okay. Okay. Um, okay, that's fine then. I guess we have, to me, it seems like we have completely different conceptions of like free will and like determinism and etc. So it'd just be more of a semantic dispute, I guess.
Maybe. So it's, I mean, you could give me an account of free will if you'd like, and then I could tell you what I think of that.
Well, yeah, the account I gave was that like just not having some like antecedent deterministic conditions.
Why do you think that's enough for free will?
So when you ask questions about like, oh, why do you define this word to be this? I don't really know. I mean, that's just the way that like I intuitively like sort of take free will to be. Um,
Well, okay, let me give an example of why I'm concerned with this. So, if there was a person that was making choices and their choices were not determined, their choices were, let's say, random, like quantum events. Whenever there was like a collapse of a superposition, and sometimes it would go in direction A, sometimes it would go in direction B. The person made a different choice. So, and then the person is coming up on a decision: are they going to rob the bank or not? And then a quantum event. It's not. They're not determined to rob it or not rob it. There's a quantum event, and it randomly goes either direction A or direction B, and then they're going to go in accordance with wherever the particle goes. It goes to the right, it goes in direction B, so they do rob the bank. If that were the case, it would strike me a little as a bit weird to say that that person has free will because their choice to rob the bank or not rob the bank was the output of a undetermined process. And therefore, now, because it wasn't determined, it would be, say, appropriate to blame the person or to put them in jail. But if it was determined, then it wouldn't be. That would be weird to me. But I don't know if you're making a claim like that. But to me, when I'm considering a case like that, the idea that if the person made the decision, say, randomly, that they would have free will strikes me as a pretty weird definition of free will, at least.
Not really. So this, what your dispute kind of sounded like was just like, it's not my hand that punched you. It's not me that punched you, it was my hand. That's what it sort of sounded like with the whole bank analogy. Like that particle that makes up you that was indeterministic, um, it, it was free, it was undetermined by anything else. It's a part of you. So like if I go and I hit someone in the face, right, I'm gonna be responsible for what my hand does because it's a part of me, right? And I don't think this the objection is really an undercutter because with the determinant stuff of like not having free will, then you necessarily didn't choose the action that happened.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a disconnect here in what we're saying here. I mean, do you see any connection between free will and moral responsibility?
Well, I think there could be there. I think there not like a direct connection, but I think you would definitely draw a connection in the sense that if if you had no choice in doing something, why should you be held responsible for it? And that's a big issue on like the determinist view, right? If we're all determined, why should anybody be held responsible for anything, right? It's not their fault. By definition, it's
Okay. So, would you say that you think people should not be held morally responsible for their actions if their actions were determined?
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it sort of
Okay.
poses a possible issue that I don't know if we should or we shouldn't. That's I'm not making a claim that like it's like a definite issue. But I could see someone saying I don't think they should be punished.
Yeah, me
Um,
too. I guess I'm still just I'm not like I'm not understanding why an undetermined choice, why you would call that free will, and maybe you don't have an answer for why you would call that free will. But
I call it free
okay,
will
so
because it's not determined. That was my definition that I've been sticking with. Like they're just not determined, just not forced. Because a determined to me is it's analogous to force, right? You're just being forced by some greater thing than you. Um,
yeah, it's just that it seems to me it doesn't seem like enough because if a decision isn't determined, that tells me something about what the decision or the choice isn't. It doesn't tell me much about what it is because like it could be random, and it seems a little weird to me that if an event is the result of a random process, that's sufficient for saying that you have free will. Maybe it's a necessary condition for free will that our choices not be determined. That makes sense to me. But that it's sufficient doesn't strike me as a like a good account of free will.
can I ask you a question real quick?
Sure.
So do you think something being determined and random, do you think that's like a true dichotomy? Like if it's not the case, something's determined, then it's random, and then vice
That's a
versa.
good question. I don't know. I
Okay.
don't know.
Because if I were to posit a third option, it would be like influenced, right? Because obviously, I don't think it's completely random. Like, when I kick a wall, right? Those are repeatable, right? Usually, when I kick the wall, there is either a dent or my foot is hurt, and that's repeatable. So to
Mhm.
me, it seems that we have extremely probabilistic outcomes, right? That's why we see, sort of the same outcomes after doing the same action over and over again. The reason why the water hits the ground every time I drop it is because it's extremely probable that's the case. I don't think it's determined though.
Okay. Yeah, I suspect they probably are determined, but I don't know. Maybe they're not. Um, hey, would you mind if I bring up Danny?
Yeah, 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 yeah. And if I'm taking too
Cool.
long, Brett, you can just kick me off. Like
No,
I'm
hey, it ultimately it's up to me how long I talk to people. I'm enjoying this conversation. I especially love, and I got to give you a lot of credit for asking a question where I don't know the answer. You ask a question, I don't know the answer. It's a good question.
okay.
So I especially like that.
I appreciate it.
Okay, I'm back. Just a question. I got another phone call. Can people hear me when I'm on that phone call?
Nope, the live pauses.
Cool. Okay. That is good to know. But I do. This one's actually important enough that I have to address it. So give me one moment. Oh, and I'll bring up Danny actually, and then you'll be able to talk to Danny
Yeah,
while I'm
good.
doing that. Cool.
Hey, okay. So I don't know what position you hold. It sounds like you hold to libertarian free will. So libertarians don't typically think that, and I think you agreed, but just to make sure we agree that just because there's indeterminism with respect to the relevant choice is not it doesn't sufficiently give you or establish free will, right? I think we agree on that, right?
You said indeterminism is something being indeterminate doesn't give you free will.
Yeah, as it pertains to a choice, right? Just because it's in let's say the process of making there's a process of making a decision. It's not a sufficient condition that if there's an indeterminate factor that therefore you're free, right? There's a specific. It has to be a specific type of indeterminacy.
So the question's to me a little bit strange, just because when you insert the word free, then it goes back to this whole like, okay, what is the whole like
Here, might show, here. Let me give you an example. Okay. Are you in college?
You said what?
Are you in school?
Yeah.
Okay. So you chose to go to school rather than go into the workforce. Is that right?
No, I actually work in.
Oh, okay, that sucks. I'm sorry to hear that. You work in school. That's a lot of work. Okay, so you chose to be a student over exclusively work, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Now, if someone asked you why did you choose one rather than the other, and you said there's no explanation, wouldn't that be very weird?
Um, if you said there was no explanation, yeah, I would think that was weird.
Yeah, and so it's in the same way that if they said I ran, it was random, right? I mean, I think the idea for free will, I think this is where, like free will, in some sense, the decision is up to you, right? If it's random, and what I think where Lance is coming from is that if it's random, in what sense is it up to you? So
Well,
if you say that you made a choice to go to
Danny,
school,
real quick.
yeah,
Danny, how do I mute myself in here? Because I'm not seeing a mute option, and I don't want to bother people
okay,
to type.
bottom right, there should be a setting options, and then like to see the camera and stuff, and to flip the camera or whatever, and there should be a mute. There should be a mute mic. I is there not?
Okay, so is it muted?
Yeah, yeah. It's muted now. It's muted now. Good. I cannot hear you. No one can hear you. All right. So as I was saying, MK. So if the decision to go to do one thing over another is random, it's hard. It's weird to say that number one, you had control over which decision that was made, or that it was up to you. And so that type of randomness doesn't seem like it captures what you're trying to capture and saying that people are free, right? What would you think about that?
um, yeah, I mean, like, I don't like the word randomness to be honest, because randomness seems to be like it to me. It like inserts this like hidden meaning that it's completely uninfluenced,
All right,
which
let's
does
get rid of the
not.
word random. Let's just say not explained. Are you good with that?
No, because even I don't even think that captures it, because I think there are explanations for why you do it. They just don't necessitate you doing that thing.
Right.
So,
They're partial explanations.
sure, that's fine. That's fine.
Like cancer, like smoking only partially explains why someone might die of lung cancer. Right.
Yeah, I
There's
can.
going to be other things that, all right, it doesn't like smoking is not always is not a sufficient cause for cancer.
Yeah, I accept what. Yeah, I accept that.
Okay, so when I hear that it's not, it's either going to be not explained, partially explained, or fully explained. And fully explained means that like you got the joint necessary and sufficient conditions for the outcome, right?
Yeah.
And so now the idea is that if an unhealthy type of non-explanation in the process of making a free will choice is when there is no answer to why you made a choice. I feel like. And so it might be an answer to say, yeah, I went to school because I chose to. That might be, I mean, I don't think it's a very good one, but let's suppose that is one, right? But if someone were to say, but there is no explanation for why I chose this thing over another thing, then it starts to look like you got the type of inexplicability that really undermines you having control.
Well, that just means that they're not sure for why they sort of um, acted in that particular way. But I think it's ultimately just chalked up to the fact that they wanted to by virtue of some internal feeling, and I don't think that it hinders free will at all. Like even if you say that there's a feeling and they made this choice, I don't think the feeling determines that. I think that they can be like, hey, I have this feeling, I'm gonna do this and act upon it, and ultimately I just do it because I want to. Why do I want to? Because I feel like that.
Okay, well, it's true that someone might misreport or misdescribe what's going on, right? They might say, I don't know what explains why I made these choices in the past." But what I'm trying to say is that take a case where there is, in fact, no explanation for why you do one thing over another, why you went to school rather than why someone went to work, right?
Uh, I'm sorry. So would you mean explanation as in like the person can't explain why they did it,
No.
or okay? So do you mean no cause? Is that what you're saying?
Well, there are explanations that are not causal. I want to take all kinds of explanations, any kind of explanation. But causal explanations are one type of explanation.
Yeah, okay. So do you want to narrow down your what you mean by explanation? Because like there's the person's understanding, their ability to convey what happened, what they feel is the reason. And then there's just like the causal explanation, like oh, this thing explains this outcome. What do you mean by that? The
So I don't know if I have an exhaustive account of explanation, but at least when it comes to that stuff, events that happen in the world, I think counterfactually. So if the rock caused you or explains why you tripped, okay, cause is a type of explanation. If the rock explains why you tripped rather than continue on your run, then without the rock you would have continued on the run.
that's not necessarily the case though. Like you would accept that, right?
Wait, but if it were the explanation for why one outcome happened rather than the other, then it grounds a counterfactual. Had that not, if that explanans didn't, if the thing that is doing the explaining wasn't there, then you would have the other outcome uh,
Well,
instead.
in the hypothetical, are you saying that the rock was a necessary condition for them to trip?
No.
Okay, so it they could have there could have been a rock there and they still not tripped, right? Does the rock doesn't it explain it could explain why they tripped, but even there being an explanation for why they tripped doesn't mean that the rock being there necessitated them tripping. If
No,
you get
all I'm saying is the rock explains why they tripped rather than continue on their run. And that trivially means to me that had the rock not been there, then the outcome that obtained would have not obtained. Instead, the other outcome would have obtained.
I disagree with that because to me that inserts determinism. And the reason why is because you're saying, okay, the reason why this was the sole because you would consider that a full explanation, right? The rock
Yeah,
is a
yeah.
and then if you're saying it's a full explanation, that's just inserting determinism into the hypothetical,
Okay,
correct?
but there can be partial explanations. But if it was partial, then the rock only partially explains, and so there needs to be another factor. So let's say it was a rock plus there was fact that was raining. It's those conditions that explain why you tripped rather than um, continue on your run. If there wasn't a rock, you would have continued, and if it wasn't raining, you would have continued. But the fact that both conditions are met, you in fact tripped rather than continue on your walk.
But some explanations aren't deterministic, right? You can the explanation of why something
Partial
occurred.
ones, partial ones.
Well, would something being random be a partial one?
Oh well, something can be partially explained, partially random.
Well, I'm asking like randomness alone. Like, can randomness serve as a full explanation?
No,
Why isn't that the case? Like
because
why can't I
remember
say that?
you didn't like the term random, so I said what I mean by random here is just not explained. I'm fine to get rid of the term random.
Yeah, but then it went to from going using random to just jumping on the other side of the seesaw, which is just
Lance, you're free to contribute too. I mean, it's your life. But look, the point is, you asked me what I mean by what it means to for something to explain, and I'm saying that when it comes to the world out there, of course there are explanations in math and logic. I'm not really when I'm talking about events, right? And I'm talking about this event explains that event rather than this other event, right? I'm talking about a counterfactual analysis.
well, yeah. I definitely understand that, but if what you take to be an explanation is just something that's going to be determined, then I just wouldn't even accept the idea that explanation
By
exists.
determined, you mean full explanation, right?
Well, I'm using what you mean by explanation, like which you said it was fully determined. If you define explanation as something that's going to be fully determined, right? I wouldn't even accept that explanations exist.
Explanations ground counterfactuals. That's what I want. For the purposes of this conversation, is counterfactual grounding. So take the smoking case, right? Suppose a person has been smoking for 30 years and they got cancer. Someone asked me, well, what explains that? Okay. At the very least, if I appeal to smoking as why they got cancer, at the very least, had they not smoked, they would have not gotten the cancer.
That doesn't follow though. Like,
well, then in what sense would it be explaining?
but look, that's just smoking is just one possible explanation. Like,
no,
if
I'm
somebody,
saying if it is the case, not possibly the case, if it is the case that I'm saying it's true that because they smoked, they got cancer, then at the very least, had they not smoked, then they would have not gotten cancer.
no, but I wouldn't accept that because even saying that by virtue of them getting cancer, it was because they smoked, that'd be inserting a determinist
By
view
determinist, you mean fully explained, right? I don't even need a full explanation because I agree that the smoking doesn't fully explain why they got cancer. There's a lot more to the story.
But what you're saying is how you define fully explained is determined though. So if
But I'm
you're,
saying explain.
let's be clear on something. So if you're gonna insert like fully explained as to mean determined, and something random can't explain why something came about, then I wouldn't accept that explanations exist because I'm not a determinist.
Sorry. Let me put me on do not disturb.
Okay, so Danny's out of here for a minute.
So I'm good.
Oh,
Do
okay.
you want to say something, Lance?
No, I'm just enjoying the back and forth. And Danny, don't worry. So thank you for coming here. And also don't worry. I think some people, this might be a little like technical or repetitive for some people, but I'm okay with it. I am enjoying the conversation and I think it's a conversation worth having. So I want you to
Okay.
continue. I don't want it to throw off your flow by getting involved.
All
But
right,
Danny,
well,
don't feel like you need to keep talking. If you want to take a step back,
I
that's
have a
fine, too.
commitment to paleo. We're going to go live, so I'm going to try to wrap this up. But look,
Okay.
MK, basically, if I say that something's explained, I either mean a partial explanation or a full explanation. But explanation doesn't entail that there's a full explanation.
So are you? Is it a full explanation entails something that's determined, correct? Because that's what I'm
That's
trying
how
to.
I'm understanding. In this case, sure, yeah. Uh-huh.
So to say that something's partially explained is to say that it's partially determined, and that there's some other unknown epistemic thing that determines the other half.
Sure, or it could be random.
But it can't. Well, okay. Well, then it random.
Not explained, meaning that it's partially explained, but there's no further explanation. But that, as far as why the outcome's obtained, there's going to be a sense in which you can analyze the various outcomes and say there's no further story we can put to this as far as why we have one outcome over another.
Okay. So. But okay, so that to me it's a bit trivial because then I can just be like, I'm not looking for an explanation because I'm not the determinist.
Okay, so the point is that if there is no explanation for why you make a choice, that's really I think completely undercuts the way that we think about actions and deliberations and explanations when it comes to why we make choices.
I don't think so. I think we can look at all the elements that increase the probability of a said outcome coming about. But to say that because you have those factors that increase the probability, that still, under my view, doesn't necessitate that outcome.
But probability raising is distinct from explanations because look, the fact that there are, I might see something, and that raises the probability of another event occurring, but there might not be any explanatory tie.
Well, I grant the idea that, look, if you define explanations as something being determined, right, obviously something
No,
that's
I didn't do
determined.
that. I said explanations can either be there can be a full explanation or a partial one. If it's partially explained, it's not determined.
Yeah, I understand you're saying that, but you
Okay.
also said that explanations are determined. Well, that's what it means to be fully
No, I
explained.
didn't say that. That's precisely what I said. One type of explanation is determined, right? Another type of explanation is partial explanation and thus not determined.
Okay, but then you said when I clarified, right, because I was just like, okay, determined equals full explanation, right? To say something's partially determined is to say it's a partial explanation,
That's right.
right? And partially determined, correct?
That's right.
So and then you said there's some other half of it that we don't know epistemically that is also going to be the other half of the explanation, and that's going to be determined.
No. Then it could either be that we're missing a chunk of the explanation, which we will say this is only partially explains it. There's an unknown set of factors, or there is no. It's undetermined. There's a part of the story where there's nothing to fill in.
Well, so it's random.
Yeah. So let me give you an example. Take a random number generator. It generates numbers 1 through 10. And let's say the random number generator pops up the number 8, okay? Why there's a number 8 is due in part that it's because of the random number generator. But that's only partially explains why we got the number 8. Now, because it's a random number generator, there's not going to be a full explanation, right? Why we got the number 8 rather than number 7.
But no, I think there is a full explanation. The explanation.
No, it's a random number generator.
Let me say why it is. So the reason why I think it's a full explanation is because it would be explained by the randomness of the nature of this thing. Right? It's explained in the nature of this thing.
Now that it's switched here. You said you didn't like the term random, and I actually agreed with you because people have various. So I got rid of the term random, and I want to substitute random. What I mean by random is just.
I'm just responding to your number generator. That's all I'm doing.
Not explained, right? Okay, yeah. I'm sorry. So, basically, when I say random number generator, is that when it pops up a number, there's no explanation for why it pops up one particular number over another.
So when you say not explained, you just mean random?
Yeah.
But then we might as well just go back to the word random because there's no distinction between those things.
Okay. So as long as you understand that, but what I mean by random is no explanation. So then when you said that randomness explains the number, that's a contradiction.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Okay, well, yeah, because I had the terms confused. Now I'm clear that
It's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So to me, if I accept the idea that there are random things or things that are not explained, then it's not an undercutter to say that something has no explanation, because what you really mean by no explanation is that it's not determined.
Well, it's true that if it's not explained, it's not determined.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. So
Okay.
if I believe there are just factors that increase the probability of an outcome coming about,
But that has
right?
nothing to do with explanation.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's the contrary.
But
That's
I'm
my
interested. We're all interested in the question: why does someone make the choices that they make? Now, the libertarians want to say that there is a cause. You partially explain why you make one choice.
There can be indeterministic causes. Cause doesn't
That just means a partial explanation, a cause that doesn't sufficiently bring about the effect.
It's not a partial explanation because that would be to insert that it's partially determined, and if it's not partially determined, then it wouldn't be a partial explanation.
Remember, determined in this instance means that when you have for any type of event or effect that the antecedent conditions are the necessary and sufficient necessarily and sufficiently explain that kind of effect, right?
But
So to say partially determined, I'm interpreting you as partial explanation.
Well, but I'm not talking about an instance of where there's some sort of antecedent conditions, because that would be inserting the determinist view. That's my main issue. Because when we're talking about these things, you're using language that automatically inserts your view inside of it. I'm not willing to really accept that. My main point is that if all you mean by not explained is just random, right, or just not determined, then I can actually accept that things don't have an explanation, because I don't believe that everything's determined.
Okay, and then that gets into the reductio ad absurdum. It depends on what we're talking about, but you would agree with me that just to say there is no explanation for why I chose to marry this woman rather than that woman, that seems like a reductio.
No, because it's not a reductio, because you're only defining explanation. You're defining explanation in a weird way.
I'm not. I'm using the counterfactual analysis of causal explanations or explanations that we see in the real world is a very common way of thinking about. This is the way scientists think, right? They have a hypothesis, right? If that hypothesis explains the data, then without the elements of that hypothesis, you wouldn't get that data.
Look, even like, so do you think when you go to the doctor and you find out you have cancer and you tell the doctor that you were smoking for 50 years, do you think that when the doctor says you got cancer because you were smoking, he's inserting some sort of, in using that as an explanation, he's inserting some sort of determinist view?
Not necessarily, just at the very least, it partially explains it.
Wait, no, because then you're saying it's partially determined. So now you think he's
No,
inserting that
it's not partially fully explained. But by determinism, we've already agreed that determinism means fully explained, right?
yeah, determined is fully explained,
So
aka
don't
fully
say partially
determined.
determined because that says partially fully explained.
Okay, now you're confusing me. Like, what?
Either something is determined or it's not. A partial determination seems like an event that's been partially determined. I'm interpreting you as partial explanation.
Okay, you just said something is determined or it's not. So, like, when you say is determined, do you mean fully determined? Because that wouldn't be a true dichotomy if you're.
Wait, look, the context of determinism with respect to the free will debate is that only one possible outcome is going to obtain. No other possible outcomes are going to obtain given certain, either laws, certain relevant metaphysical facts in the remote past.
Yeah.
Okay, so but with certain types of partial explanations that have randomness there, then the future's open.
The future's open? Yeah, in the sense that it's undetermined. Yeah, there isn't just one thing that happens.
Where are you disagreeing?
Well, I'm honestly unclear where you disagree because
Here's what I'm
it seems
saying.
like- it seems like
Let's just
you're
rewind.
stating
Let's
like- you're
just
stating
rewind
like-
really fast, if you'd allow me. Here's what I'm saying: that indeterminism, okay, that's to say, if we say that when we analyze our decision making, just to say that there's a part of the story that is not explained isn't sufficient to say that we have free will. Even the libertarians accept that because in other words, where you put your indeterminism really matters.
I don't like labeling myself because then as soon as I label myself, I'm stuck within the confines of that label. And I don't use labels. I just say what I believe and stuff. And if my position isn't consistent with, what other people believe, that's completely fine to me. It's just what I personally believe. I don't think
But
that's
I'm telling you, I'm telling the people that are sympathetic to your view, right, would want to say that it matters where you put your indeterminism. You can't just put your indeterminism anywhere you want, because if indeterminism is happening at the level of you choosing your wife, then there's no further explanation for why you choose one woman over another. And that seems silly because presumably you want to say that what explains why you chose this woman over that woman is because she was hot, cute, nice, sweet, whatever.
This is only, you understand, reductio ad absurdums only work when there is one position that is worse than the other in terms of the key reductio you're pointing out. But if it's the case that determinism, you're forced to choose that woman, then it's even worse. Because, you had to marry this woman.
No one brought up the word force. I'm just telling you that if you
No,
agree
I'm
with
saying
me,
determinism is force because you have no choice. There's only one possible thing, and this thing was determined prior to your existence.
Well, wait, I got to jump in there because we do have to be careful about using language like force, because forced makes it sound it carries pragmatic connotations, like if someone forces someone to do something that's bad. But if like deterministic laws, quote unquote, force me to do something, like if I trip over my shoelaces, then I fall. Like no one has done anything bad to me. So you have to be careful about using language like that because of the connotations that are ordinarily
Yeah, I
associated.
agree.
then let me just grant, for sake of argument, that there's something wrong with determinism.
I just want to say, I can substitute it for having no choice in matter, but it's still a reductio on that end, on that side, because you had no choice in choosing your life under the
I'll
determined.
grant it. That's just not my concern. My concern, let's just say determinism is completely flawed with respect to decision making. I'm criticizing a specific type of indeterminism. Okay, so the fact that determinism is flawed it doesn't matter here. The point is that if you chose a girlfriend and someone says, "Why did you date Kate rather than Emily?" Okay, if you said, "Oh, there's no explanation for that," or if it were true that there's no explanation for that, that completely destroys your agency.
Wait, but hold on, Danny. People don't speak like that. Even let's say there's a
That's
doctor.
my point.
Hold on. Look, if you want to say that speaking in terms of my view doesn't has some pragmatic limitations, sure, I can grant that idea, right? But that's also is the case on the determinist view, in which if it's true on both sides, then it's not an undercutter because we're at the same level.
That sounds like a tu quoque fallacy. But I've already granted, for sake of argument, that determinism is nuts. It doesn't make any
But
sense.
my
I
point, but
granted that.
Danny, my point is that reductios only work when you have some sort of high ground in terms of non-absurdity.
Yeah. Do you think it's absurd that are you dating someone, MK?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Have you ever dated someone?
Yes.
Okay. Was there a reason why you dated her rather than being single?
Was there a reason that
Was
determined?
there an explanation for why you chose to date her rather than remain
Wait,
single?
wait. What you mean by an explanation is something, some antecedent deterministic
No,
conditions.
no. I'm fine with partial explanations.
Uh, can I? So hold on. Let's clarify. So if I say that there are certain factors that made it probable for me dating her, would that
No,
serve as?
I'm not asking that. I'm not asking about. I'm asking, is there an explanation?
But my view is probability. There are things that influence you,
But
not
that's not what I'm
determine you.
asking you about. I'm asking you, is there an explanation for why you chose to date her rather than remain single?
Is there a partial determinacy for why I dated her? No, of course there's no partial determinacy.
I'm not. Look. So so there's no explanation.
But what you mean by explanation is Danny, come on, bro. Like
Fine.
you
Use the way
want
you
to
use the terms,
loaded-
okay? I'm not going to foist my conception of explanation on you. I'm just asking you, if someone on the street, hey, MK, I see you were dating her, man. I thought you were happy when you're single. What changed? Why did you choose? What is the explanation for why you chose to date her instead of remain single? What?
Yeah,
Would
I
you say
mean,
there is an explanation
yeah, I
in that
mean,
case?
a lot of the time when people provide explanations like that, they're not going to provide every single explanation for why it's the case. They just provide the big one, right? So, like for example, by the way, I'm not using your conception of explanation because it inserts your own view of of determinism. So people provide the big one. They say like, "Oh, why did you break up with her? Oh, she's cheated on me."
Yeah.
A lot of the times. It wasn't just that. Maybe you guys were
Sure.
fighting
Okay.
before
That's
that, and
compatible
you're
with
just
my view of
providing.
explanation.
We're talking about like pragmatic
No,
linguistics.
You're not listening.
No,
There's
I'm
senses of
100%
explanation.
listening, Danny.
Look. I have to correct you here. On my view of explanation, people can provide explanations, and yet they could be partial. They don't have to fully explain the situation, and
No,
I agree with you. That's pragmatic. I have no problem with that. The point is that you and I agree that if you were to say that there is no explanation for why you chose to date rather than be single, that would undercut a lot of the way that we talk and go about our world when it comes to our decision
but
making.
it's used. But you have to understand that it's only using your conception of
No,
explanation. I
let's
have a
use your
different
conception
conception.
let's
Okay,
use your conception of
then
explanation.
it does have an explanation.
Okay, you see, we agree then. It would be crazy under your view to say there's no explanation for why you chose to
No, we
date rather
don't.
than remain single.
I'm sorry. There needs to be a very heavy clarification. Please let me make this. So, if you're equivocating on if I'm equivocating on what explanation means, we're not in agreement because we're talking about two different things, Danny.
No. We're in agreement that it's linguistically crazy to say that, yeah, there's no explanation for why I chose to date rather than remain single, right? We're in agreement there.
Okay, like though using that word, I agree. Yes.
Okay.
If that's what the agreement is, then yes, we wholeheartedly agree.
Okay, now is determinism a form? If A determines B, is A explaining why B obtained? On your view of explanation,
Not on my view.
so determinism is not a
Well,
form.
actually, I take that back. I would say that it would be a explanation, but not the. It wouldn't be. There's also other qualifiers, I guess, as an explanation. How about that?
Okay, so yeah, so that's the point, is that indeterminism, right, is more aligned with, though, non-explanation, because when you ask, why did this obtain over that, and if it's not determined, right, there's at least a part of it that's not explained.
No, they're different. They're just completely different qualifiers. It's only a partial explanation if you say the definition is being, as an explanation, is being fully explained or determined, right? But if I have two different ways in which I can use the word, which is explanation, as in there are influencing factors that make one outcome more probabilistic than the others, then I can still call that an explanation and still answer if somebody asks me, "Oh, is there an explanation for why you would do X?"
Lance, it looks like you wanted to say something, Lance. Oh, okay. Look, okay, we agree that I don't know what you mean by explanation when you were talking about the real world, right?
I can define it for you.
Okay.
So how I take outcomes to be is that there are these compounding factors that increase the probability of a given outcome. I don't think there is this cause that like one cause that like necessitates this outcome. I think for any 10
So just
causes,
define explain. What does it mean for A to explain B?
it just means for A to heavily influence the existence of B.
Okay, what does heavily influence mean?
Heavily influence, just damn, that's gonna be it's hard to semantically convey. Just increase the probability.
Okay, but you understand that things can increase the probability, and we may not know the explanation for why the probability of the said event, if it did occur, why it occurred.
But no, but searching for the extra y in search determinism, because it presupposes that there needs to be more outside of just that probabilistic aiding factor for
I don't get it. Look, when we ask questions, why did this happen? We're looking for what? An explanation, right? But we can understand that it's very probable that Mount Vesuvius, right, is going to, like, ancient people thought it was probable that at some point there would be an earthquake, but they didn't know what explains earthquakes.
I want to be clear that these are all pragmatic objections. Like these are all just objections to.
I'm not interested in this meta point. I'm trying to help you understand the difference between probability raising and explanation. Again, do you agree? Do you think people from 3,000 years ago?
No, wait, hold on. Wait, no. Now you're bringing in knowledge, right? And you're bringing in knowledge, which that's a whole nother conversation, right? Like something could be probable.
No, let me finish my point. Let me land the plane here, okay? So, did people 3,000 years ago that lived, let's say, in Japan? There are a lot of earthquakes in Japan. Okay, people from 3,000 years ago, or maybe 2,500 years ago, okay, they thought it was probable that there would be a earthquake, right, in the future, in their lifetime.
I'm not too sure. I mean, I'll take your word on that.
They specifically built. Oh, you're taking, but just on a side note, they specifically built their structures so that when they come down, they can easily put it back up. They were aware of earthquakes. It plagued them, and their whole infrastructure was built around the earthquakes. Okay,
fair enough. I'll take your word on it.
Okay, just say I'm right on that. People fact check what I said. I think they should. But the point is that, so they understood there's a pretty strong probability that they'd be affected by an earthquake. Notice that has nothing to do with did they know the explanation or anything to do with the explanation of earthquakes.
Wait. Well, it depends. You have to dissect the justification for why it's probable, right? Because
it happened a lot. They saw it. It happened to them, and it kept on happening to them, and so it probably will happen in the future.
Okay. So what's the objection? I'm confused.
You're saying that raising the probability is just what an explanation is.
Hold on. So let me clarify. Maybe I might need to add some factors onto like what I mean by an explanation. So what I mean by an explanation is like when something does happen, right? And then you can evaluate all the factors surrounding why for why you think it happened. It only takes the fact that it happens, and then you have these compounding factors to say that it's an explanation.
Okay, but that's the last term you said is what I want to be defined. I need the definition for, because I gave my account, you rejected it.
But we just defined explanation. I
use explanation in the definition.
No, I didn't. No, wait, that wasn't the definition of explanation. I was just using the word because I thought we already.
What you mean by explanation?
Sure, I'm completely fine with that. Yeah, okay. I did earlier. So, explanation.
What does that mean?
Yeah, explanation just means that there are these like compounding factors that all heavily influence the outcome of X existing.
Okay, what does heavily influence mean?
Increasing the probability of it existing.
There you go. That's why I brought up the Japan example, because you're tying explanations with increasing probability. But I showed you the Japan example is supposed to show you that the Japanese people knew it was very likely that there would be another earthquake. They built their society around it, but they did not know the explanation.
You can explain it. Then I don't even, if you're saying they don't know the explanation, that's the way I define explanation. Then now you're just saying they don't know this other way I'm defining explanation.
Look, that's supposed to be a counterexample that either you're confused or using idiosyncratic terms.
No, I'm not confused at all, right? So explanation, you can explain things in different ways, right? So
How
like
did the Japanese people explain? How did anybody before they knew plate tectonics explain earthquakes?
I don't know. Like why do I
They
like?
didn't know. The explanation for earthquakes is plate tectonics.
But I'm not saying to know something is to have an explanation. I'm not conflating knowledge and explanation and
I'm
probability.
not
Like
saying
that.
you're doing that.
So
I'm saying
it
that
could be the
there's a
case that they
distinction.
didn't. It could be the case that they didn't know and then have an explanation.
Oh, they didn't know what.
They didn't know what the exact cause for why it was happening. Now they could predict it and be like, okay, here's the explanation for why it keeps occurring is because it happens more oftentimes than not. That's induction.
Look. In the Japanese case, do you agree that they didn't know the explanation?
But they use probable reasoning, right? They
I'm
use
just asking,
induction.
did they know the explanation for earthquakes? Yes or no?
In the way that I understand explanations, yes, because it's probability.
Okay, what was their explanation for why earthquakes occurred?
Yeah, the explanation was because, for one, wait, are you talking about when it first occurs? First occurred or why it kept occurring?
No, look. You're a Japanese person from 2,000 years ago. Earthquakes happen, and you ask them, "Hey, why do earthquakes happen?" Would they give you the right answer?
But usually there's some scope to that question. Do they mean why do like
If
the
you ask someone from Japan
bro,
2,000 years
like, can
ago
you answer
why
the
earthquakes
clarifying
occur,
question so
would
I
you
can
get the correct answer?
can you just answer the clarifying question so I can actually answer you correctly?
It's not a hard question, but ask your clarifying question.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to say is like when somebody says why are the earthquakes keep happening, right? Are they there's a scope to why like the earthquakes, right? Are they referring to the first one? Like why did the first one or the first chain of earthquakes? Like what's the scope of the
What
question?
the heck? Any earthquake.
Okay, so for the first earthquake, there might not be an explanation. For the earthquakes after, right? There would be an explanation because
Okay,
there
so
is
tell
an
me what the
induction.
Japanese people. How,
Can I finish, please? Like, there is an explanation because how I define explanation is just like something occurs. You evaluate the compounding factors for what influenced it, and then those compounding factors are the explanation.
yeah, but then you tied a compounding fact. Sorry, what do you have? It heavily influenced with probability raising. I'm trying to
Yeah,
show you.
but
There's a huge.
it's the factors that increase something being, right? Not the increasing of it. It's the factor.
Look here. Here's a really good example. Actually, I don't know if this is true in Japan, but it is true for some other areas. Right before an earthquake, you've heard what animals tend to do, right?
No, I'm really not the earthquake guy. Like I'm
Okay, well, what animals can sort of sense right before an earthquake happens. They kind of scatter in the middle of like if it was a plain or if there was open area, they would like they have these kind of behavior where it's right before an earthquake that so in other words they can sense something we can't, right? And someone can fact check me. I'd ask chat to fact check me, but there's weird ass behavior when it comes to certain animals right before earthquakes. If someone was aware of that, okay, and they saw that animal behavior, right, they would think there's probably going to be an earthquake. Okay, now they are not giving you an explanation for the earthquake.
Wait, hold on. So yeah, the animals aren't an explanation for the earthquake, but the animals reacting in that way is by virtue of the earthquake. So the earthquake is the explanation for the animals, but not vice versa.
Look, the point is that the person realizes the behavior of animals raises the probability, and that just means, on your view, that they heavily influence this particular outcome of earthquakes, which is not true. Animals don't do anything with
No, it
respect to
doesn't
causing
because
earthquakes or
there's
explaining
also
earthquakes.
no, but that situation can equally explain any other phenomenon. Like maybe the animals are riled up because
Okay,
they
this
heard
is
a
not
tree.
that difficult.
Wait, hold on. Can I please finish? Maybe because it's only probabilistic, right? If there's some sort of particular thing that this thing implies over the rest of the other possibilities. Like for example, that doesn't necessarily increase the likelihood of an earthquake coming about.
It
Sure, that could be.
does.
Hold on. Let me give you the hat in the rabbit in the box analogy, right? So you could say, okay, well, I have some sort of 2-pound box. Sure, that's consistent with a rabbit, but that's also
This is
consistent.
ridiculous. This is
Hold on, bro.
ridiculous.
If you're not, I can't talk to you, Danny, if you're going to do this. This is not even productive at this point.
Well, look,
This is,
look. I'm just saying that if you think that the animals raise the
look, look,
probability of an
I
earthquake, then
know,
you're
I know
committed.
what you're saying. I just want to be able to finish what I'm saying because I
Okay,
let
go
you
ahead.
say
Go
what
ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay,
But
so
I think I
so
should talk.
So in the instance of the 2 pound box, sure, that's consistent with a rabbit, but does it increase the probability that it's a rabbit? No, it doesn't, because anything that is 2 pounds, like a 2 pound a dumbbell, can equally be explained, right? So that's not evidence of a 2 pound dumbbell, nor is it evidence of a 2 pound rabbit,
You're
because it's
bringing in
consistent.
evidence. This is different. Look, it's very simple. You said explain if A explains B, then A heavily influences B. If A heavily influences B, then A raises the probability of B. Now let's look. These are all basically identity statements. So the animals go crazy right before an earthquake. They sense something. Okay, then that raises the probability of an earthquake happening if you were to witness it. But that does not follow that they heavily
Jenny,
influence.
Jenny.
It does not. Now I let you finish. It does not follow that therefore they explain the earthquake. They don't. No one's going to say that
You're,
animals explain why they're
bro, this
earthquakes.
is
Otherwise,
literally
I would kill every single animal in California.
Bro, this is equivalent to just like, oh, I have a different conception of explanation.
Well,
I
you're
think
using an
everyone.
idiosyncratic definition of
Yeah,
explain.
but that's just on your end. You can believe it's idiosyncratic. I believe that my definition makes more sense and encompasses
You're saying animals
more.
cause earthquakes or explain earthquakes. That's
No,
ridiculous.
for one, that's not true, right? Because let me respond to that whole animal stuff because I really don't think that was a good point. So my whole point of me bringing up the rabbit analogy is to show that just because something is consistent with one possible outcome, that's not necessarily evidence of it. So
What
sure,
are you
evidence.
talking
Wait,
about?
wait. So yeah, animals being riled up, that's consistent with an earthquake. Yes, but it's also consistent with a tree falling in the forest, right? And there's no relevant
I don't
distinction
know
in
what
the
you're talking about.
probability. If there's no relevant distinction
Don't know what
between
you're
the
talking about right
probability,
now.
can I just finish my point?
Why
Like
would I
this,
let you waste your breath? I don't know what you're saying.
I can give clarification on what I
Okay.
said.
Okay,
After.
what do you think you're responding to?
Yeah, I'm responding to the fact that you're saying that animals going crazy is raise the probability of an earthquake. I'm just saying that's not the case.
No, that's not what I said. Look,
You just said that. You
give me the
literally just
argument
said
that I gave
evidence
you.
You just said evidence. You just said animals going crazy.
No, give me the
raise
argument that I gave you. You're not understanding the argument. I can repeat it.
I don't think there was an argument. I just think there was just like
Okay,
this
well, that's
explanation.
where you're wrong. Here's
I
the
think there was
argument, right?
hold on, I think there was an explanation in this ramble
No, no,
fest.
no, 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 no. Listen to the argument.
No,
The
no, no,
argument
no,
is
no.
this.
I want to be able to respond to
You
you
don't know what to
without you.
respond to.
No, no, no.
You
I
don't
do
even know
want
the
to.
argument per your admission.
So if you said you don't know what I'm saying, and then you don't even, how are you gonna say I'm not responding to the argument?
Because you just said you don't know the argument.
No, I didn't say I didn't know the argument. I said I don't.
Okay,
think you
what's
gave
the argument?
Yeah, I don't. Wait, hold on. That's begging the question. I just said I don't think there's an argument. That's
Okay,
what I'm saying.
that's where you're wrong. I gave an argument, and let me give it again. Okay, here's the
No,
argument. Okay, that under
I
your
just want to
view,
respond to your analogy. Can I just respond to your
no,
analogy?
I want you to respond to the argument.
Oh my
All right,
goodness,
it's
bro.
not going to be long.
Really?
Literally 30 seconds. So here's the argument, so you know what to
Okay, hold on.
respond
If I
to.
let you go, will I go uninterrupted? Because I feel like
swear
I've
it.
given you the
I
courtesy.
swear.
and you
Here's the
haven't done
argument. Okay, under your view, this is what you're committed to. Okay, crazy animals raise the probability of earthquake. Under your view, that would mean that crazy animal behavior strongly influences earthquakes, which means that crazy animal behavior explains earthquakes.
that. Okay.
Crazy animals do not explain earthquakes. Plate tectonics do. Now go ahead.
Okay. So I reject the premise that animals going crazy increases the probability of an earthquake. I reject that premise, right? Because the whole thing is for something to be probable of one thing, it has to be more probable than the other equally explained outcomes. Like in the example of the rabbit in the box. If there is a 2 pound box, sure, that's consistent with a 2 pound rabbit, but that's not evidence of a rabbit because that can equally be explained with a 2 pound dumbbell. So in the instance of where the crazy animals going crazy in the forest, right? Sure, that can be consistent with an earthquake, but that's also consistent with like a loud noise going off in the forest, or like maybe Bigfoot running around, right? And since it's consistent with both ideas, it's not evidence of one over the other. So it's not evidence or probability raising.
Look, we stipulated, right, that the animals have crazy behavior because of the earthquake. They can sense something that you can't. We've stipulated that in the hypothetical.
No, 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 because you stated that it increases the probability of earthquake being
Yes.
occurred
So if
about.
you saw, look, if in a situation where they have that behavior because they sense an earthquake coming, then given your knowledge, it raises the probability that an earthquake is going to happen.
But so you're just narrowing down the hypothetical to just like, okay, so this is an instance. For one, I don't think it raises the probability of an earthquake. Just so you know, either way, right? So you can say, sure, they're reacting because of an earthquake, but they could have easily been reacting for any
That's
number
not
of.
the hypothetical. Engage with the hypothetical.
What do you mean? We're talking. Look, epistemically, we're always talking from a limited perspective. So why are you talking about like, oh, it's evidence once we know it's an earthquake?
Look, it's
Like
a
what?
hypothetical.
Well,
I've stipulated, and I even said I could be wrong. People can fact check me, but I've stipulated that animals can sense earthquakes before humans, and they
Danny,
have erratic behavior.
Danny,
Now,
Danny, this is post hoc reasoning. This is literally post hoc reasoning.
I don't
Your
even, I don't know why you're saying that. Makes no sense, but I'm going to
Look,
move on. Okay.
your
It's,
hypothetical is post hoc reasoning because you're taking a hypothetical in which we already know the outcome and then saying because we know the things that happened prior, that's evidence of the conclusion. No, that's post hoc reasoning.
in the
You're
world
taking
are
the
you
outcome.
talking about? Or look,
You,
this
you know
is,
what?
this is a simple hypothetical. We stipulate that animals have a sense of earthquakes before they happen. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, they could also have a sense of any other thing. Go ahead.
That's great, but that's not part of my hypothetical. So you're so far, okay, good. In this hypothetical, animals can sense earthquakes before you do. In this hypothetical, you know that. Okay?
Okay.
And it's a unique kind of behavior, a behavior that occurs with like all it's unique so insofar as that if you see it, you're going to think that they're sensing something of an earthquake. All right? So far, so good.
Sure, we're gonna think that
Okay. So
they're
you
gonna
go
sense something.
outside, and you see this exact erratic behavior. Okay? And so you're going to think what? What are you going to think, MK?
The hypothetical you're bringing up is post hoc rationalization.
What are you going to think if you see all these animals do this crazy behavior, unique behavior? What are you going to think?
I'm gonna think that they're sensing something dangerous.
But I stipulated this. You know about this unique
Wait,
behavior
in the
because
hypothetical,
they can sense earthquakes.
but they can also sense other things, so it doesn't rule out the other things.
No, but they only do this unique behavior for that sensing.
Oh my gosh, this is so dishonest the way you're like narrowing the
I know.
hypothetical.
I know.
Danny.
Hypotheticals are pretty difficult for you. It seems like, but let's just try
Bro,
to get through
you're
it.
narrowing
Okay.
down the hypothetical so much to sort of like catch me
Yeah,
in this
because you're not being
box here.
charitable. You're not. I don't know why you're not. This is a very easy case. Most people understand. But if you know there's an erratic behavior that comes from animals only when they're about to sense when they're sensing an earthquake coming, right? Then if you see the animals demonstrate that erratic behavior, you're going to be like, there's likely an earthquake coming. There's no necessity there, and nor does
Okay.
that say.
Here. I'll be charitable now. Let's make it cordial. I'll be charitable now. So, in that narrow hypothetical, after narrowing it down a couple times, I can grant the idea that in that scenario, sure, right, erratic animals is evidence of, is probability raising.
Okay, now then let's return to the argument. If per your view, based on how you define explanation, you're committed to this. If the crazy erratic behavior, seen crazy erratic behavior, raise the probability of earthquake, coming earthquake, then under your view, that would mean that crazy erratic behavior of animals heavily influences this earthquake, which means that the crazy erratic animal behavior explains why there's this earthquake, and that is true. That is false because plate tectonics explain why there's an earthquake.
Well, yeah, so like now so when you're talking about explanations, you're just talking about, it just seems like some like deterministic causal relation, right? And so you're looking for an explanation. That is more to highlight the exact cause of the earthquake.
No,
Correct?
in that case, you may not know about plate tectonics.
No. But I'm talking about in general. You're looking for an explanation of the cause of the earthquake. Correct?
No, I'm saying that there's a distinction between looking at data and saying that raises the probability of some other data point without knowing, without committing to
I'm
an
talking about
explanation for.
I'm talking about on your end, Danny. You're talking when you say explanation, you're talking about the thing that caused right X, correct?
I'm talking about some kind of counterfactual analysis. Yeah.
But okay, thank you for adding the. Okay, so but
But
if
that's not
there are
what you're talking about.
reductios,
You're
hold
talking
on,
about
but let me
probability.
ask you this because I think there are reductios on both ends. To be honest, like we can get into
Well,
the reductio.
look. I have to go soon. I have a commitment. Do you have anything to say about that hypothetical? Otherwise, I'm going to move. I have to go.
About that particular, yeah, I mean, sure, like the reductio only works in that small hypothetical that like actually never happens in
Okay, it
reality.
works. All right.
I
Do you have a
think.
last word before I go?
I mean, I'd like to discuss your view next time so we can get into the
Yeah, I'm
reductio.
going live on Paleo's stream. I said I would go on there, so otherwise I would be fine to talk more. But Lance, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, that was a lot of
I wanna
fun.
say, my bad, my
It,
bad.
it looked it looked like it was about to get a little heated there. I'm glad both of you kept it in check. So yeah, that was cool.
All right, bye.
All right, see you
Okay.
later, Danny. So everybody, go follow Danny if you don't already follow Danny. MK, I do you have the like I'm worn out just from listening to that. How are you
Oh,
doing?
I don't have the energy to continue. I just wish we could have gotten to the whole reductio on his end of the definition because, to be honest, I only think reductios are useful when, it only shows that one side is absurd. But if there's two definitions in which we're both positing that are both absurd in a particular scenario, then I think we're on equal playing field. But that's all I really wanted to say. Thank you for having me up.
Yeah, no problem. I hope that wasn't too much for you. I appreciate you coming up here, and I'm sure we'll talk again. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. See ya.
See you later. Alrighty, I have nobody in the request queue. That's probably because that conversation was so long that people gave up or left the live. But I think that's my first time hitting over 100 viewers, so that's kind of awesome. So if you do disagree with anything above, do request. I don't know how long I'm going to keep going. I feel like I don't even know how long I've been going. It's been a couple hours now. I don't even know at this point. So yeah, so if you think that moral realism is true, that is, you think that there are objective or stance independent facts about what's morally right or wrong or good or bad, and you disagree with me, then you can request for that. If you think that people have free will, you can request for that. If you think that evil is not a problem for God, then you can request for that. And by evil, I really mean like evil and suffering. They call it the problem of evil, but I'm more focused on suffering. Okay, I still don't see any requests. So I saw a lot of stuff blazing by in the chat. So it looks like a lot going on there. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here. For anybody that gave gifts or anything to anybody, any of the guests or me or whatever, thanks so much for that. So I'll say all that right now. And I guess I'll ask while we wait for a request if anybody has questions in the chat. You can direct them at me directly. You can direct them at me directly. Part of the redundancy club here. So somebody says I have questions, but don't think they're worthy of a box. Yeah, you're welcome to throw your questions in there. If I see it and I feel like it's worth addressing, then I'll do my best to address it. Thoughts on epiphenomenalism? Don't think much about it. I tend to think it's kind of a vacuous view. So I think a pragmatic worldview, those kind of views just sort of dissolve and go away. Yeah, how much does determinism explain true randomness in quantum mechanics? I don't know. It seems like a question for Danny. All right. Oh no, we're dropping. We're dropping down to 70. So somebody go ahead and request. I don't know if I have a whole lot to say right now because there was so long of someone else having a discussion that I don't really have a thought in my head about what to start talking about. So yeah, if you have questions for people that are, I guess I could say something a bit about who I am and what I do since I just started doing this week. So I've been on TikTok for a few months. I have a YouTube channel. It's called Lance Independent. Here on TikTok, also called Lance Independent. I have a blog called Lance Independent. I have a background in philosophy and psychology. I have a master's in philosophy, PhD in psychology. Some of you that are regulars have already heard this a million times, but I want to tell new people what I'm up to and what I do. So I work in the psychology of metaethics. I work in moral psychology, experimental philosophy. So, a variety of areas that are interdisciplinary that draw on both philosophy and psychology. My primary research focus is basically the empirical question of whether non philosophers, people without formal training in philosophy, whether they're moral realists or anti realists. And, there's other questions you could ask. How does that influence their behavior if they are realists or anti realists? So, I recently finished up my dissertation where I argued that people are neither realists nor anti realists. And I have a big interest in language and how that influences how people think about philosophical issues. There's a variety of topics that I'm happy to cover, but the main one is metaethics. So that top one, that moral realism is false. So Danny's a friend of mine. I've known Danny for a while, long before I was here on TikTok. We ran into each other on YouTube, and over on YouTube I do streams. I used to do them every Saturday. Now I'm trying to do them on Mondays, although I didn't do this past Monday. So I'm doing them on Mondays. That's going to become the regular thing. But I interview people. I discuss topics in meta philosophy or philosophy of philosophy. This is discussing what's the nature of philosophy. How do you do philosophy? What's good philosophy? What's bad philosophy? Bring people up and I talk about peer review and psychology and meta science. Basically, how do we do science? I love meta stuff. So I talk about psychology. I talk about philosophy, all sorts of stuff. Someone asked me a question about something I have no idea. So someone says, what's your view on the existential inertia thesis in comparison to divine conservation thesis? I have no idea what that is. Maybe you're talking to somebody else. I don't know. Lance, do you have a video that's more like a beginner's guide to metaethics? I actually don't. And it's an interesting thing because people will sometimes ask me, hey, like, what's a good intro book to metaethics? I've never seen an intro book to metaethics. Miller has a great book that's kind of an intro to metaethics, but for like a more advanced readership, it's a great book. It covers the topics, I think, quite fairly. Maybe I disagree with some of the framings of things in the book, but what is it? It's called a contemporary. It has a pretty straightforward title. Contemporary Metaethics and Introduction. Yeah, I never recall if it's an introduction to contemporary metaethics, but it's Contemporary Metaethics and Introduction. I do think there's a newer version out, probably newer than whatever I read. So check that out if you're looking for that. But there's a blurb on the back of it, I think, from Brian Leiter that says something like, great for advanced undergrads and grad students. So if you were taking an Intro to Metaethics course, that would probably be an upper level course as an undergrad. You'd be in your third or fourth year maybe, and this would be a good book for that. But for like really, really intro, I've never seen a good intro book. I haven't done a video on it, like basically going through the metaethical positions and stuff. I tend to be a little more unstructured. So I do pretty unstructured interviews, debates, discussions where it's not very formal. And that's really my preferred style. So TikTok is a naturally pretty, it's pretty consistent with that. I like open-ended holistic discussions where there's not quite as much structure. I do like structured interviews. I just don't really do them. All right. Yeah, so Poki-chan says, I loved your peer review discussion. So that was with Adam Mastriani, and Adam is great. So you could check out, he has a blog called Experimental History, which is not what it sounds like. It's actually on psychology and a lot of like meta psychology stuff, talking about the replication crisis and other issues in psychology. So Adam and I have similar educational backgrounds. We both did our PhDs in like closely related areas of experimental psychology, like social psychology. I don't know exactly what Adam ended up doing, but so Adam has a fantastic blog. A lot of them, if you don't like reading blogs, there's like a voice. He usually does a voiceover for them and records them. So if you prefer listening, then you have that option too, and it's just phenomenal. Adam is a superb writer. Is really just funny. So it's very entertaining and engaging writing that covers all kinds of topics in psychology. It's really, really good stuff. Okay, someone says, are there any realist accounts like error theory? Objective moral facts exist, but are all false. Well, I don't know what it means to say they exist, but they're false. So I haven't heard of anything like that. That just sounds like error theory, but I don't know what it means to say they exist. Okay, some people are asking me that sound like a philosophy of religion. Yeah, and then somebody says, bro, he's not Joe Schmidt. I am not. I do not study philosophy of religion. So if it's questions about philosophy of religion, I'm not the person to ask. You can ask Danny. Danny might know about it. Joe Schmidt has a channel called Majesty of Reason over on YouTube, and it's another phenomenal channel. So I would definitely recommend that channel. So Joe does philosophy of religion. and is a PhD student in philosophy, and it's great. Joe was just on my channel 2 weeks ago, I think, and we talked about, and that's something if you're interested in. We did a video where I was just asking Joe, like, how is the application process to get into a PhD in philosophy program, and what are your recommendations? What kind of advice do you have? And Joe just like, went through all the sorts of things you'd want to do for that. So that was pretty cool. Not the standard sort of video that I do, but it's a practical, useful video. So you can check that out on my channel. But Joe also on his channel has a whole list of things like how to write papers for philosophy and that sort of stuff. So if you're looking for practical advice for doing academic philosophy, Majesty of Reason there's probably a playlist on there that covers all that. That's just a really good resource. So that's one of my favorite philosophy channels on YouTube. I don't think Joe is here on TikTok. And then another one of my favorite channels is Kane B. That's Kane, and then just B. I think it's short. This is B for Baker. So Kane B has an amazing philosophy channel. It's been around for like 10 years too. It's been around a long time, and he does a great job just getting into philosophical issues. So I guess I'll talk about random philosophies. Oh no, actually I do have a request. I just looked. Okay. I'll try to get caught up in the chat. Oh, that's funny. Someone says Kane B is a good video and that Lance should shout him out. And that's before I'm just seeing that now. So yeah, cool. All right. Welcome, Hassan.
Yeah, that's not
Hey, how's it going? What's up?
good. Good. Could you hear me clearly?
I can.
Perfect.
What do you want to talk
Yeah,
about?
thanks for having me up. I just wanted to know, why you think evil is a problem for God.
So I think it's a problem for God because I don't think that there's a good reason why, if there is a God that was genuinely all-knowing, all-powerful, and all knowledgeable, like if they're omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent, uh, why would they allow any suffering or evil to occur?
Okay. Do you think there's any like possible explanation for why he'd be okay with that happening?
I
You'd say.
certainly think it's possible in principle that there's something I don't know about that would make it consistent with the nature of a being with those characteristics to allow for there to be evil, but I've never heard of
Hmm.
any explanation. So, there's a sort of epistemic possibility, something I don't know about that would make it possible.
Okay.
But barring that, it doesn't look to me like it's consistent with a being like that for the kind of suffering we observe, or really any suffering. But there's sort of two stages. There's the sort of more hardcore, like logical problem. But even if you're not compelled by that, I think that the degree and nature of the suffering that we see in the world just doesn't look to me like it's consistent with that kind of being. Especially if we add in things like this being is like loving and it loves us and cares about us and wants the best for
Hmm.
us.
So, so yeah, we can say that, yeah, if that being is loving, right? Then necessarily you wouldn't see suffering in the world, because it'd just be love and just peace in the world. But if we say that that being has a will of their own, that can, you know, kind of allow for situations to occur, where there's suffering for a end goal where, their loving attribute is, you know, is going to be like actualized, where there's like a plan at the end. Wouldn't that kind of suffice?
So there's a couple issues. One is that I think a lot of the suffering that occurs has very little to do with like free will. So there's animals suffer, and that doesn't seem to be accounted for by talking about people exercising their wills. The other issue is that I don't see any logical inconsistency in God creating people that have free will or the ability to exercise their free will, but they always choose to do good things and they never bring about suffering with their decisions.
Hmm. So I mean, what about in the if the explanation was that this world, well, we believe God created this world, designed this world, that this world, the whole purpose of it is a test. And in a test, just like in school or whatever, you have wrong answers to choose from and right answers. And if we all have the capability to do evil, to cause suffering, if this world does bring upon us some type of obstacle that we go through that we see as harm, that to test our resolve and whatnot, wouldn't that be consistent with what the purpose of the God that created this world, in that being it's a test?
Yeah, so maybe it would. I have a few concerns about that. One of them would be that there's nothing logically inconsistent about giving people a test where they could get the answers wrong, but they never do. So God could have created a world to test us, but then why is anyone making decisions that result in evil or suffering? They could just get the answers correct.
So yeah, I'll be back for it. Yeah, sorry, just talking to someone. Sorry, could you just repeat that last point?
No problem. I think that God, if God created the world to test people, God could have
Yeah.
created a world both to test people and nobody ever gets like the wrong answer. So I don't see any inconsistency with people having free will and then people never doing anything evil or bringing about any suffering.
Well, that would kind of like that wouldn't be a test then, right? If everybody always got the answer right, then there wouldn't be any wrong answers to choose from.
Well, no, there would be wrong answers, just nobody got the wrong answers.
But can wrong answers be actualized in this world? Do people actually
You could have a
choose?
world where wrong answers could be actualized, but they're not actualized. So yeah, they could get a wrong answer. They just don't.
Well, at any point, will a wrong answer be actualized?
Yeah, you can make God can make a world where no wrong answers ever occur.
Well, how would that would not be consistent with free will? That
What's the inconsistency?
people have to be able to choose. If you have a population of, let's say, 100 people, and you give them the ability to choose freely, someone is going to, at some point, choose the wrong answer.
Why?
Because
They don't have
people,
to.
yeah, they don't have to, but because of that free will, they have all these different options based off of their desire. Again, that's another aspect about them. They have the ability to desire things. They have the ability to want to be selfish or to want to cause harm because of their selfishness, because of what they have within them. So whatever reason, there's a pathway to choose that wrong choice.
Yeah, so God can make people have free will and then none of them are selfish.
I mean, what is being selfish, right? If that is part of the free will, being
Is
able to be
it?
selfish. Yeah, being able to
The,
be selfish
is God selfish?
can be, but he's not.
Okay. And does God have free will?
Yeah, God has free will.
So God has free will but isn't selfish. So God could just make people that are have free will and are not selfish.
So the point of a test, right, would be that you can choose different pathways. You start at a certain kind of like default position, right? And then from there you go and choose your pathway. You can be a selfish type of person. You can be a good person, right? And those are the choices that you have. So what you're saying is that to eliminate the choice of being able to be selfish. Is that what you're
Well,
saying?
no, I'm not. Let's say people had the ability to choose to be selfish and then nobody chose to be selfish.
Hmm.
There's no logical inconsistency there. So God could. There's no logical reason why God couldn't make people, make a world in which there are people. They could choose to do evil. They have the ability to be selfish and evil and mean spirited and nasty and do terrible things. And they don't do so. They just never do so.
Why don't they do so?
Well, let's say they don't want to. They just don't have the desire to do so.
Okay, did God force them to?
It depends what you mean by force. So like right now, I've never gone out into my yard and eaten dirt. I can do so, but I don't because I choose not to.
Mhm.
If we have free will, it looks like I have the free will to eat dirt, but I
But
don't
why
do so
don't you?
because I don't want to. Because I don't want
But
to.
why don't you want to?
Well, I would have my views that there would be some complicated causal historical account of why I don't like to eat dirt, and it would have something to do with like human evolution and taste and my personal
No,
experiences.
you don't have to go
So
that
you
far.
could
But
give
yeah,
me an
human. Mhm.
so there, on a Christian or a theistic worldview, presumably that God would have created people. Maybe God used evolution to facilitate the psychology of human beings, whatever the causal account would be, I don't think people generally just choose their preferences and desires. They at least don't have complete and total control over them. So there's some degree of restriction. Like, for instance, I like pistachio ice cream. I don't think I can choose not to like it. I just do like it. That's just a fact about me. I don't think that that's some sort of limitation or on my free will. Like, because I don't have the free will to choose to not like it, therefore I don't have free will. So I don't think facts about the sort of
Wait,
desire profiles that people have mean
you
that they
don't
don't have free will.
you think if let's say you like something, you
Mhm.
can't you can't make yourself not like it?
I don't think so. No. I mean, I may have some limited control over some desires, but not all of them, and not like just at. I mean, certainly not at will. Like, I can't just will to not like pistachio ice cream.
I mean, let's say, okay, what if you actively try to make like you can make yourself, uh, you know, create a situation where you find disgusting. You can kind of like even do some brainwashing type of deal where you sit in front of something and that influences you to make you not like that ice cream.
Yeah, I
So
might be able to do something like that, but
you can manipulate.
the amount of manipulate. So it might be possible to modify some of my desires under some circumstances. And I certainly don't think desires are unmodifiable. We can imagine a world where there's a
Mhm.
pill that for any desire you want to change, and you could take the pill and change your desire. I don't think that really is going to undermine my point, which is simply that you could simply have people that
Mhm.
have free will but don't do anything evil. I don't see any inconsistency there. I don't think that
Yeah, no,
people
I
having
agree
free
with
will
you.
like requires that they do evil.
No, no, I agree with you. Like you, just because you have free will doesn't mean that necessarily means you have to do evil. Um, but I think it's the reasons why you're not doing that evil is very important. Because if it's because uh, it's like that person just has affinity to just to do good in terms of like they like to do good. Um, they only see that as benefiting them. All the reasons they have is towards good. And yeah, I can see that happening potentially. But let's say, could this person make mistakes, right? That could be one reason why they may commit something that is considered evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be a mistake. That would be a different category.
Mm-hmm.
So I can agree with that. Um, as long as they're not being forced, as long as they have the ability to do evil, if the situation, you know, uh, you know, if they chose that pathway, then I'll be okay with it.
Right, and that's what I'm proposing. I'm saying that there could be a world like this. People have the ability to choose to do evil, but some set of circumstances are were created or set up such that they simply don't do so. Like, you could, I mean, I'm sure that there have been cases where instructors have given exams and all of the students in the class really study very, very hard and they all get 100 on the exam. I think that's probably happened at least once in human history where there's a whole class where everybody gets a 100. Now, that does not mean that that was guaranteed or necessitated. It could be that if one of the students didn't study just enough, they would have gotten a 98% instead of 100. It just happened to be that they all got the 100s because of how hard they studied. So they did what they needed to do to get perfect scores. I wouldn't think that that would invalidate the test. It's not a test because everybody worked really hard. So I think that that can generalize, that you could create a world in which that basically always happens. So it always happens that people do what they need to do to get the perfect scores on the exams, even though it's possible that they don't get those perfect scores on the exams. The way that this world turns out, as a matter of historical fact, is they don't.
Yeah, so hypothetically, that could exist, but the reality is that, like in this world, um, if you have like the human beings themselves, we have the ability, like we have this ability to um, to choose these different pathways, right? And at some point, someone is going to choose that. Because of the population, the larger population you have, there is a higher likelihood someone will choose that wrong answer. Would you agree?
I agree as a contingent feature of the way that this world is created. That's my problem. It doesn't have to be that way in order for people to have free will. You could just have free will and then nobody ever does anything evil.
But see, that's not possible, I think.
Why not?
Because no one ever doing any evil, right? That would mean that every single person, all the billions of people that have ever existed in this hypothetical world, um, were like they had the affinity to do evil. They had the affinity to go steal something, right?
Hold on.
But
Did you
but
say
they
the
didn't.
affinity to do evil?
Yeah,
What are you saying there?
yeah, they have the affinity. That's part of free will. They
Yeah,
have the
so the affinity to do evil is part of free will.
Yeah.
Does God have an affinity to do evil?
No, God doesn't.
Okay, does God have free will?
Yeah, God has free will
So,
in that.
okay, so that seems like a
Wait,
problem. It seems like there's a being that
no.
has free will and no affinity to do evil, so it doesn't look like it's a part of the concept of free will.
How are we defining evil here?
You could tell me what you think. I would think
Okay.
that any instance in which you bring about suffering
Hmm.
is part of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about evil. Like I'm not thinking of evil as this like really robust metaphysical notion. It's an accident of history that the problem that we're talking about is the problem of evil. That's just what it's called. But for me, we don't have to focus on like conscious decisions to perform malevolent actions. It could just be any instance of suffering. A paper cut. Why does any paper cut ever occur? I think even that is a problem for the existence of God because I
Wait, wait,
don't
wait,
think it
wait.
would be necessary to create a world in which anybody at any time ever suffers at all.
Okay,
It's just
if
not
your
necessary.
if your definition of evil is just suffering, then you could say that working out, at the gym is suffering. That's evil.
Yep. Yeah. So
That's
that would be included in what I think is not necessary. God doesn't need to make people work out. God could have created people that have perfectly fit people. It's not necessary. There's no logical reason why people have to work out to have muscles.
so working out is evil. Could be evil. Or
Well,
is evil.
let's not get tricky with the words here. So, as I said, the problem of evil is just the name for a broad range of issues that arise for the existence of God. And that's inclusive of suffering. And this is a well understood feature. So, if we talk about like, why do animals suffer? That is a problem for the existence of a God that's all good, all knowing, and all powerful. Now, animal suffering doesn't have to be the result of evil. Humans can, be unalived as a result of natural disasters, where nobody chose to do anything to bring about any harm to anybody else, but people were harmed anyway. That is a problem for the existence of an all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful God. So it's just an accident of history that it happens to be called the problem of evil. But if I call it the problem of suffering, that could be confusing, and it would exclude like non-suffering things that might be bad, like unfairness. So I'm not saying, hey, conventional use of the term evil, suffering is a type of evil. I'm saying suffering shouldn't happen if there's a God that has these traits. And I mean, that's pretty much all I need to say for the concern to go through.
But suffering is such a general thing, though. It's like you're saying. Let me ask you: is there any type of suffering that's good?
I don't think so. No, I think all suffering is unnecessary, and it would be better if it didn't occur.
Okay, so like someone says, studying for a test, that's suffering.
It's a
It,
means to an end that has to do with the contingent features of the way that humans are. Studying is like ideally people would just know what they need to know. So yeah, it's bad that people have to study in order to learn things. It'd be better if they just knew it.
so it's bad for a person to try to improve themselves and
Yeah, it'd be
increase
bad.
their
Well, it's
knowledge,
bad relative
even.
to them just already being whatever their goal or ideal is. So, like, if you have a person that's trying to overcome, let's say, an addiction, it would be better if they simply didn't have the addiction to begin with.
Okay, yeah, okay. So that's the thing. If if the whole purpose of this world that um, you know, sorry, let me get my thoughts together. so from my point of view, the purpose of this world, that the suffering aspect of this world, has benefit to the human being in that it it allows the human being to kind of like work hard, right, to gain things, right, to appreciate things. You have to suffer a little bit, and so if that's like the overall intent of this God to teach people a lesson, right? And this God is the one who sets up morality, so therefore it wouldn't be evil to suffer.
Do you think that's sufficient to account for all the suffering that occurs?
Yeah, if the the whole purpose of this world, right, is a test, then the different levels, the different degrees of suffering, right, is would be explained by that test if at the end of the day, um, that test, people do get the result in terms of whether they pass the test or not. If there is justice at the end, um, if the goal is fulfilled, you know what I mean?
So, yeah, well, I know what you're saying. I don't know if that I agree with you. I mean, some people, they just have horrible diseases and then they're unalived and they don't have any opportunity to learn a lesson. I mean, some people are kidnapped and terrible things happen to them and then they're unalived. And in those cases, the person has no opportunity to grow or learn or experience anything from the suffering that occurs. They suffer and then they're gone. And I don't see how that would in any way show that they were like tested. They just bad things happened and then it was over. So you have that's one problem. And then you have the problem of animal suffering. Why do animals suffer? Are you there? You might be muted.
Oh yeah, I was. Yeah.
Okay.
So you're asking me, why do animals suffer?
Yes, and also there's like case. I mean, we could focus on one at a time. So we could focus on that. Why do you think animals suffer?
Yeah, animals suffer because that's part and parcel of this world in terms of, you know, what the purpose is. Um,
Do you think it's good
what
that
the
animals suffer?
so in terms of suffering, we have to define that
Like
exactly.
a
So for
lion
example,
hunts down a gazelle, it rips it apart, experiences horrible pain, and is eaten alive. Do you think that's good when that occurs?
there's no so the purpose of the animal, right? In terms of its suffering, for example, it feeling the pain, right? That is something that's biological aspect of it. It's the pain receptors, giving it, you know, uh, telling the animal they're in a bad situation. That could be looked at as, you know, hey, I need to get out of the situation, run away, something's biting me. So that's actually a benefit to have that type of uh, design for that animal. But in terms of it being eaten by a lion, that's part of the kind of how animals are set up, the animal worlds. There is
Right. What I'm asking is
prey and,
why they're set up that way. Why set things up so that animals suffer? Why do that?
as I said, in terms of suffering, we have to be exactly sure. So what it depends on what is the purpose of animals? Animals, right? For example, for us, animals are
That's not
sustenance.
what I'm asking you. I'm
Yes,
asking you why animals
wait,
suffer.
wait. Well, again, suffering is such a general term. We have to be exact in terms of.
We don't need to be that exact. Come on. You know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about suffering.
As I just gave you an example
Bad
of what I.
experiences, any bad experiences, any negative, positive, affective states. So, any time in which something has a conscious experience of something that they don't enjoy, that it's negatively valenced, they don't want it, they want to avoid it. I mean, we don't have to get that specific.
Yeah, but again, I gave you an example where it's good to have that.
Well, I'm
For
not
example,
agreeing with you that it's good.
well, why
So
don't you agree? Because look, if you don't, you have pain receptors in your
well, you
body.
asked me a
Oh,
question.
yeah,
Let me answer the
yeah.
question. So, pain, it serves an adaptive function both in humans and non-human animals, and it serves a function of prompting those organisms to evade certain sorts of harmful things. Now, that pain is only needed for those animals to survive and reproduce because of contingent features of the way that the world is. But that pain ends up being needed under the circumstances that we're in order for us to survive in these circumstances doesn't mean that these circumstances had to be this way. God could have created a world in which there is no suffering because we're never in circumstances where we would be subject to that kind of pain or harm or damage in the first place. There is no requirement that animals eat each other, that animals have nerve cells, that animals suffer bodily damage. God could have created a world where animals are all floating around happy and smiling and they never get hurt. Could have created that. So when you talk about some kind of suffering being good, there is some kinds of suffering that is good in a sort of local way. It's good as a means to an end given the conditional and unnecessary circumstances that we're in. So if I have a really bad toothache and I quote unquote need to get a tooth pulled, I might say it's good to go to the dentist, but it's only good relative to the consequences that would occur if I don't go to the dentist. But that whole scenario didn't need to occur at all. So it might be good for animals from an adaptive perspective for them to experience pain, but that doesn't mean in any given instance in which an animal suffers that it's good for that animal. So the pain evolved to facilitate adaptive behavior in animals, but that doesn't mean when an animal is going to be eaten, that pain is no longer going to serve it. It's not going to be reproducing. It's not going to help it avoid anything. It's just going to suffer, and then it's going to be unalived. And in those circumstances, which occur every day, they're occurring as we speak. Millions and millions of animals are suffering horrendous agony, and it's serving no useful purpose for those animals at all. They're just suffering and then being unalive. They're being eaten alive. And in all those cases, it didn't need to be that way. So if there was a benevolent God that could literally do anything, that God presumably is choosing to bring about those circumstances or to allow those circumstances to come about, even though it could intervene and prevent those cases. And that seems horrible to me. That seems like something only, if there were such a being, it would have to be some kind of vicious demonic being for it to allow all that to happen when it doesn't need to.
Okay, so you said a lot right there. So let me kind of, I think what you're asking me is like, why did God create this world in the way it is, right? Where people suffer pain. And so that he could have created a world where there isn't any pain. And so what I would say to that is he did actually. That would be called heaven, right? Heaven would be a place where there is no pain, there is no ill will, and all this suffering would not exist. And so then the question comes back to, okay, so then why, if God created heaven, there is a place like that, why couldn't this be heaven? Why couldn't this world be heaven? Well, the answer to that would be because there's a distinction. There is a difference between the purpose of this world, right? Why it's set up the way it is versus the way heaven is set up the way it is. So the creator, the designer of this world intended for these things to happen, for people to experience suffering, to experience obstacles, you know, um, for multiple reasons, right? One of them would be, for example, if someone did harm someone else, right? Someone who's innocent, that person who did the harming would face consequences, so they would be harmed as well. They would experience suffering that they caused on someone else. So there is retribution right there. That's one of the reasons why suffering exists. I don't think anybody would reject suffering in that situation. So there's multiple. That's just one situation right there where would you accept suffering is okay?
No. What? Why is suffering okay? I don't think suffering is ever okay.
No, I mean if
Literally
someone
ever in
caused
any
someone else suffering,
circumstance.
if someone caused someone else suffering, shouldn't they suffer as well as
I don't think
retribution?
so. No.
Really? So if
Why should
someone,
they suffer too?
well, like they, let's say someone unalived your family, would you be okay with that? Would you not
No,
think
I would
they
be
should
very much
be
against that. That would be terrible.
okay? And do they not deserve punishment of some
No,
sort?
I don't think so. So,
Really?
I don't think people deserve to be punished for the sake of being punished.
No,
I
for their
think that
actions.
it's yeah, I don't think so. No. So I'm in favor of us having a legal system and punishing people and putting people in prison and stopping people from doing bad things. But that is in order to achieve the best outcome we can reasonably achieve given the circumstances we're in. It's not because I think people should suffer. I don't
Wait,
think
what does that
anybody
mean?
should suffer.
Wait, say it again.
For a complete, so I'm just in favor of a more or less a utilitarian approach to punishment. You punish people because to the extent that it brings about a better outcome than if you didn't punish them, and that's the only reason I'm in favor of punishing people. No other reason than that.
Wait. So you were punishing that person who just unalived a whole family, um, not because they unalived that whole family, but because what? What's that reason?
Well, I would favor a legal system in which people would be punished for doing that sort of thing in order to hopefully deter people from being motivated to do it in the first place. So if people are aware that if they perform a particular action, that they risk significant punishment, that serves as a general deterrent. The other
To teach them a
reason
lesson.
to well, no, I'm not that interested in teaching people lessons, not unless it changes their behavior for the better. I mean, that's another potential rationale.
No, you said
So
to
punishing
deter
people in
them,
order to
right?
teach. Sorry.
You said to deter them from doing that
Yeah,
action again.
deterrence though is preventing them from doing it in the first place. It's not teaching them a lesson.
No, or well, that same person to deter them from doing that action again would be
Yeah,
a
so that you would
lesson.
also want to punish people in order to prevent them from recidivism. You want to prevent them from doing it
Yeah,
again. So if a
I,
person,
I
yeah,
guess
so
that's a
that's
better word.
another
Yeah.
reason for punishing people, and it's a good reason. If someone steals something and you punish them, hopefully they won't steal again. Um, so that's one reason. Another form of punishment would be rehabilitation. So part of the goal of a punishment process might be to try to get the person to recognize the wrongdoing and change their character and behavior. If that works, that's a good reason to punish people. But notice that in all of these cases, the reason that I would be in favor of these actions is in order to bring about better outcomes. It's not because I think the person should suffer. So if a person did a bad thing and we could give the person a pill that would just make them stop being evil and doing bad things in the future, I would rather do that than just lock them up in prison forever.
But here's the thing: if that person took the life of someone else, right? You're saying that that crime they committed doesn't warrant that their life be taken as well?
But that's what I'm saying. Yes, I am totally against retribution. I'm not for anything like that.
Why?
I
Retribution is like
well, I
why?
don't think that that's good. What's the point of that? Why would I do that? Why would I favor that?
Um, because it's fair.
Yeah, it doesn't
It'd
seem
be
fair to me.
just. It'd be
I'm not in favor
just.
of that.
You don't think it'd be just?
No, I think it would be bad to do that.
So it'd be injustice for someone who unalived someone else, took their life away, to in turn get their life taken away.
Well, if that's the best way to bring about a good outcome, I might be in favor of it. I think in practice it almost never is. But yeah, I'm not in favor of retribution. I don't know how many different ways I could say that.
Yeah, but I just don't see how, like the value, like don't you value human life?
Yeah, of course I value human life. I don't think that requires being retributive.
I think it does. It's taken away
Well, if you value human life, taking so a person unalive somebody, unaliving them, how does that demonstrate value of human life?
because it shows how how highly we value human life that when someone takes it away from someone else, that that person, the pain, the punishment is so severe that their life should be taken away as well. And so
Why do you think that?
it's
Why should their life be taken away as well?
because they took away someone else's life. It's
Yeah,
like
but why is
an
that a
eye
reason
for
to
an
take
eye.
away their life? Yeah, but why though? Like I'm not even saying you're
Hmm.
incorrect about this. I don't have
Yeah.
this attitude and I can't grok it. Like I just don't have
Yeah.
that attitude at all.
Hmm. So so again, the value of the human life. Um, for someone to take away to rip away someone's life where they had the potential to live on and you know uh, have their free will enacted and do what they wanted in life, they took that, the person that unalived them, they took that away. They took away their free will. They took away
Hmm.
their existence on this earth. And so that doing that is severe. It's something severe. And so then that person who did that, it'd only be fair that their life be taken away, and so they can't do those things. That would equalize things.
What if you could get that person through a conversation to understand the badness of what they did, and they genuinely and fundamentally reform themselves as a good person, like they became a good person who cared about others, and they would go on to become a doctor and save many many lives, hundreds of lives. So you have that option, right? So, and you have a crystal ball, you could see the future. And in one future, they feel deep remorse, they change who they are as a person, and they go on to save hundreds of lives. And in the other, you unalive them. Which of those would you choose?
Yeah. So I would say that in general, the let me see here. Yeah, the consequences of unaliving people, like that, should be. I would take the choice of unaliving, because
Why?
that would deter other people from doing it. Obviously, in this situation that you gave me, the hypothetical where I know this person's going to be, this savior, or this like doctor who's going to save millions of people. Like, obviously, if I had that knowledge, you know, I would choose that side, but that's not reality.
Well, it's a hypothetical. So,
Yeah.
and the purpose of hypothetical is to get at the underlying principle of why we would favor one outcome over another. And so, in practice, I understand that it might be difficult. That we just simply don't have the resources, the ability to reform every single person that does anything bad ever. And so, a lot of times we put people in prison, or we come up with other sites of fines and other sorts of punishment. But I see
Mhm.
those again; they're not logically necessary. The world doesn't have to be set up in a way where human psychology is like that. It's just that that's how the world is, and that's exactly the problem. That people are set the way that people are doesn't seem to me like the way that they would be if there was an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving God, because it would have created circumstances, I think, in which we didn't need to do those things in order to prevent even worse outcomes, like throw people in prison for life. It would be far better if there was a world where doctors could create a pill and it just makes people stop being evil, and it would be even better if they weren't evil in the first place. At least I think so. um, so it looks like we just have really fundamental disagreements about what would be
So
right or wrong in the first place, like different
so
moral values and attitudes at a more foundational level.
so are you saying that God um, can't test his creation?
What I'm
Would you
saying is
saying that?
that it I mean, more or less, I wouldn't say that. No, I'm saying that there's nothing about testing people. I mean, first of all, I would say I don't see why God would need to test people. If you're all good, all knowing, and all powerful, why do you need to test people? Why do that? So that seems strange to me. I don't know that it's not like inconsistent with the existence of such a being,
Wait,
but
why?
I don't see any reason to think. Well, why would it need to test us?
It's
What's
not
that
need.
for? Why
Well,
is
God doesn't need to, but like, why would God
Okay,
test
so
us?
God
That's
doesn't
what you're
need to
asking?
test us, and God's testing us anyway. So why is God testing us then?
Because God has the will, free will. He can do what he likes, right?
Yeah, okay, so he
And
could
as
do what he
long as
likes,
we
but why does he
accept
do
it, right?
that?
Well, what do you mean? He set up this
Why is
test.
God testing us?
So God set up this test in order to actualize his justice at the end. His justice, his mercy, and at the end of the day, when people are accounted for on the day of judgment, God will put his other attributes into fruition for us. And so, but I don't see any problem with it. If we're in this test and we are freely choosing to make these decisions without you know God impeding and forcing us to choose.
God doesn't need to impede or enforce or do any of that to simply create a universe. God could change the laws of physics so that people don't have to
Yeah,
suffer in order to go about their lives and do things. Why didn't he do that? Why do we need to suffer?
that's part of this world, how this world is designed.
Right. Why not make a different world where we don't have to suffer? I understand that's how this world is. That's the problem. The world doesn't need to be this way. So if it is that way, then God chose to make it this way. So God is
Yeah.
choosing for children to die from leukemia. That seems bad. Why would I wouldn't choose that? Would you choose that? So you're going to create a world. Are you going to choose a world in which children get leukemia? Is that what you would choose?
So children dying from different diseases and different, people unaliving, all these different things are part and parcel of what is in this world that exists. And so it's there is good in this world. There is people don't talk about the good, the euphoria, the happiness, the joy, right? That these other children go through, right? Yeah, these other children do go through leukemia, do die, are unalived, young. That is true. But do you see how there's a duality here? And that duality comes from, again, the in terms of this world being a test, I think it's very crucial that we understand that because, for example, if let's say a father just had a child and that child develops, cancer, one of the this clearly this child this father is dealing with hardship here. This is suffering for that child and that father, and so um, one of the and that's part and parcel with the test that he is being tested by the situation he is in. God is testing this father. How will he react in this situation where his son is developed this cancer? You know, so it's harsh, but it's part and parcel with the test. Sorry, I can't hear you. I think maybe.
Oh, I feel like we're not making a lot of progress here.
Yeah,
So
yeah, but
I feel like we're kind of going in loops. So I think maybe we should take a break from the conversation and then return to it another time. Does that sound
yeah,
okay?
I do appreciate, you letting me up here and having this discussion.
Yeah, and I appreciate your patience. But I feel
Hmm.
like we hit an impasse some time ago, and
Yeah, we're
maybe
kind
this is
of
the kind of
just, yeah, circling
yeah. And
around in
but
circles
I
here.
think if we take a break from the conversation and we come back to it
Yeah,
another time, we
yeah,
might make some progress. I've also been on here for a couple hours, so I think
sounds good. Yeah.
I'm gonna call it quits now, and I got to go make dinner or something.
All right,
So
take care.
also, what I was
Enjoy your
saying.
dinner. Yeah,
Oh yeah, thanks. I will see
yeah.
you later. Take care,
No, go
and
ahead.
thanks so much for being here.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye. So what I was saying when I was muted is my dog came up to me and I think she wants dinner, but I was trying to get her to come up on the camera. So I'm gonna see if I can get her on here. Bitanga, come here. It doesn't look like she's showing up. That's such a bummer. Okay, so I'll have to figure out how to get her on the screen. But I think I'm gonna call it quits for now. Thanks everybody for being here. I thought that conversation was fine. I feel like maybe we were just not understanding each other. We were there was some kind of disconnect where it wasn't being resolved. Yeah, somebody said turn the background off. I don't want to do that right now, just because I don't like the setup and the room that I'm in. Um, so why do people do this, by the way? So the reason that I have this like stupid screen thing set up is just because everyone else does it. Why do people do it? Because when I'm on YouTube, you could just see the back of my wall, like my stupid closet with my messed up doors. Why do people do that? I don't know. Maybe someone in the chat will answer. But it shows the topic as people scroll past. Sure, but you could probably put text up that's like over the background. So I don't know that you need the full background, but maybe it just makes it easier to read. So fair enough. Thanks for the explanation. Okay, I'm going to head out. I'm going to feed my dog. I'm going to make dinner. And I will see you all another time. So thanks so much, everybody, for being here. Take care. And sorry for the people that made requests that I didn't get to you. I will be around another time.